It is 6 p.m. and the board is reconvening from closed session. There is no action to report. Trustee Williamson let me know that she has personal business later this evening and will leave the meeting at 7:30 tonight. Welcome, members of the public, board members, and staff. Thank you for attending. As noted in Board Bylaw 9324, this meeting is being video recorded and broadcast via link on our website. The recording and broadcast may capture images and sounds of those attending the meeting. I'd like to remind the audience, members and speakers, that it's not unusual for students and young children to be in attendance at our meetings or to watch the recorded broadcast. I invite you to model civility and decorum as we go about the business of the board this evening. While I cannot prohibit anyone from using unprofessional language, please think about the students and adults who are watching our proceedings. We invite you to show support for a speaker waving your fingers rather than clapping or cheering. We'll begin tonight's meeting with Trustee Rawlings leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I will lead us in a moment of meditation. Student Board Representative Sophia Hirsch will read from the District Vision, and Ms. Garcia will take roll.
All right. Ready, begin. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Well, I think this is our first meeting of the school year with our new student representative, so I think we're whole now. And I'd like to read from our board governance norms. The CUSD is governed by a board, not by individual trustees. While understanding our separate roles, the board and superintendent work together as a governance team. This team assumes collective responsibility for building unity and create a positive organizational culture in order to govern effectively. We will keep the district focused on learning and achievement for all students. We will communicate a common vision. We will operate openly with trust and integrity. We will govern in a dignified and professional manner, treating everyone with civility and respect. We will govern within board-adopted policies and procedures. We will take collective responsibility for the board's performance. We will periodically evaluate our own effectiveness. And last, we will ensure opportunities for the diverse range of views in this community, in our community, to inform board deliberations. Thank you.
Our graduates are prepared for success. They confidently move to life beyond high school knowing they have acquired the requisite skills and knowledge. They have a passion for learning and personal growth. They can thrive in a high-tech environment. They are compassionate. Thank you.
And we will now take roll call. Student Representative Sophie Hirsch.
Present.
Trustee Williamson.
Here.
Trustee Ward.
Here.
Trustee Verbeff.
Here.
Trustee Rawlings.
Here.
Trustee Pearson.
Here. Thank you. We'll now move on to Part 4, approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve agenda item 4.1, approval and/or reorganization of September 13th, 2023 meeting agenda?
So moved, Williamson.
Second, Rawlings.
Okay, Trustee Williamson made the motion. Trustee Rawlings seconded. Is there any discussion? Now is the time for that. No discussion. Ms. Garcia, please call for a vote.
Trustee Williamson.
Yes.
Trustee Ward.
Yes.
Trustee Verbeff.
Yes.
Trustee Rawlings.
Yes.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. We now move on to Part 5, student and staff reports. Item 5.1, report by student representative to the board. Trustee, this is an information item. I now welcome, again, Sage Creek student Sophie Hirsch, who will provide the board with a student report.
Thank you. Sage Creek kicked off the school year with our annual Senior Sunrise and first day of school PEP assembly, where we welcomed the freshman class of 2027 and honored the senior class of 2024 as we embarked on our last year of high school. Last week, we hosted Back to School Night, where parents were able to come to campus to hear from Principal Way and explore their students' classrooms. Our theater department is preparing for their rendition of The Addams Family, which will premiere in the Performing Arts Center at the end of October. Our fall sports season is off to a strong start. Girls volleyball defeated Rancho Buena Vista last week. Field hockey holds a record of 6 wins, 1 loss so far this season. And girls golf defeated Carlsbad High yesterday and will face off against the Lancers again tomorrow. Sage Creek's ASB is preparing for Start with Hello Week and our annual flag football tournament, both taking place next week. Start with Hello Week is an annual initiative created by the Sandy Hook Promise that promotes kindness and inclusivity within schools. Sage Creek ASB will host a Spirit Week aligning with the goals of the Sandy Hook Promise and Start with Hello Week. Our flag football tournament will take place after school next Friday, September 22nd, where student-created teams will face off against each other, trying to make it to the final round where they will face our staff team. This week is Sage Creek's annual Safety Week. Students and staff prepare themselves for an emergency by practicing all forms of drills. Community members are also encouraged to donate cases of water to replenish our emergency water supply. More information can be found on Sage Creek's website. CHS and CSA/CVA both hosted Back to School Night last week as well. Carlsbad's girls volleyball team defeated Oceanside High last night. Carlsbad's football team currently stands undefeated and will host Ramona High this Friday for their USA-themed game. Carlsbad's choir department is preparing for their Carlsbad on Broadway show, which will be held on October 11th and 12th in the Carlsbad Cultural Arts Center. The counseling departments from Carlsbad and Sage Creek will host a 9th grade family night at Carlsbad High tomorrow night, presenting on information pertinent to freshmen and their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, and now move on to item 5.2, Superintendent's Report. Trustees, this is an information item. I will now hand it over to Dr. Churchill.
Thank you, sir. We've had an amazing start to the school year, as we generally do in September. I'll provide a brief update on student enrollment this evening. As of this week, our current enrollment is 142 students fewer than it was on the state's enrollment calculation day in October of last year. While a decline in year-over-year enrollment is not ideal, there are a number of bright spots and other contexts worth noting. As we look at our cohorts of students, for example, the number of students who were in first grade last year and who are in second grade this year, or the number of students who were in ninth grade last year and 10th grade this year, for example. When we look at those cohorts of students, I'm pleased to report that 10 out of 12 cohorts have in fact gained students from last year to this year. Notably, we've gained 87 students in this year's elementary cohort, and we've gained 71 students in this year's high school cohort. The outlier is this year's middle school cohort, where we saw an overall decrease of 13 students when we look at all the students in, all the students out, going from year to year. The primary driver of our enrollment decline then is not caused by a net outflow of previously enrolled students. Rather, the net change in number of students can be seen primarily in the difference between last year's senior class of about 930 and this year's incoming TK and K class of about 780 students. Fortunately, we're not surprised by the lower number of TK and K students, as demographic studies have shown the regional birth rate began to decline around 2017, 2018, which is when our current kinders were being born. While the lower birth rate, combined with the increased cost of purchasing a home within the boundaries of our school district, are factors that we're going to continue to monitor. It's also important to note that our overall high school enrollment is higher this year than last year, and that 5 of our 9 elementary schools have grown in total enrollment from last year to this year. That includes Buena Vista, Hope, Jefferson, Magnolia, and Poinsettia. So there's much more to come on this topic in the future, but that concludes my report for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and now move on to Part 6, Consent Calendar. All matters listed on the consent calendar are considered by the board to be routine and will be enacted by the board in one motion. There will be no discussion on these items prior to this time. The board votes on the motion unless there is a board request for one or more specific items to be removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Have any blue cards been received?
We have received 1 blue card.
Okay. When I call your name, please come to the podium, state your name, and indicate whether or not you live within the boundaries of the school district. You'll have 3 minutes. The first speaker is Mr. Scott Davison.
I'd like to ask the board to reject the proposed $39,000 payment to the Anti-Defamation League for their proposed training programs. In addition to all of the references to critical race theory and gender theory in the ADL education materials, ADL has in the past several years become a highly politicized organization intent on suppressing speech and indoctrinating students with far-left radical views that ironically conflict with its own original mission of fighting anti-Semitism. For those of you who follow the news, last week Elon Musk revealed that last year ADL launched a campaign to bankrupt Twitter after Elon Musk purchased the company and committed to eliminating Twitter's previous policies of censoring speech. As Musk noted, he is now considering filing a lawsuit against ADL for, ironically, defamation. On Tuesday, ADL of Southern California filed a lawsuit against the Santa Ana School District for adopting an ethnic studies course, which it considered anti-Semitic because of the references to Israel being a colonizer and oppressor of Palestinians. Now, I know this board struggles with definitions, so let me help you out. Those are the elements of critical race theory. You have to appreciate the irony of ADL promoting lessons about CRT to us and filing lawsuits when the schools actually adopt the applications of CRT into their ethnic studies courses. Time to call the lawyers. We're probably next. So, of course, I was concerned when I saw that Megan Nevels, Associate Education Director for ADL, provided an anti-bias staff training at the COVID superspreader event, staff kickoff event on August 18th. As a quick side note, I want to say how proud I am of our educators for completely ignoring the laughable request to wear masks for the first week of school. We may have lost the legal battle on that, but we certainly won the battle of public opinion, didn't we? CUSD didn't provide a copy of any of her training materials, so we looked her up and found a training session online. Ms. Nevels begins by stating, quote, "This country was founded on racism through the stealing of land and the attempted genocide of Native American and First Nations peoples and the use of chattel slavery of black Africans to build our American economy." Now, I haven't taken U.S. history in a while, but I checked my son's AP U.S. history textbook tonight, and I can't find anything in there about our country being founded on racism for either of those purposes. Is this what Ms. Nevels shared with our staff during their anti-bias training in August? Is this what we can expect for our students during this ADL trainings during the year? It's never too late to admit that you made a mistake by adopting these divisive and hateful ADL programs and their bizarre revisionist histories of America as an inherently racist nation. Please vote no.
Trustees, are there any items to be pulled for discussion? Yes. Trustee Rawlings.
6.8.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve the consent calendar with the exception of item 6.8 in a second?
So moved, Williamson.
Second, Rawlings.
Ms. Garcia, please call for a vote.
Trustee Williamson,
Yes.
Trustee Ward,
Yes.
Trustee Verbeff,
Yes.
Trustee Rawlings,
Yes.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes,
Motion passes 5-0.
thank you. May I have a motion to approve item 6.8, the certificated personnel activity report?
So moved, Williamson.
Second, Verbeff.
Thank you. Discussion. Trustee Rawlings.
I'll be voting no on this item because I don't have enough information.
Okay. Any other discussion? Did you need some time? Okay. Ms. Garcia, please call for a vote.
Trustee Williamson,
Yes.
Trustee Ward,
Yes.
Trustee Verbeff,
Yes.
Trustee Rawlings,
No.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-1.
Thank you. And now move on to Part 7, discussion action items. Item 7.1, 2022-23 LCAP updated results from unreported data. Trustees, this is an information discussion item. I'll now hand it over to Dr. Nye.
Good
And team.
evening. Good evening, President Pearson, trustees, and Dr. Churchill. As the board recalls, in June, we presented our summary of progress, our annual summary of progress meeting where our principals came in and we shared information about the 2022-23 LCAP goals and success indicators. At that time, as part of our continuous improvement cycle, we know that we won't have all the data available in order to complete and close out the school year. So As part of that process, we always in September bring back what we call our unreported data, and that's data that wasn't available at the time in June, which includes graduation data, UC, CSU data, as well as SBAC data, which still technically hasn't been finalized until the state publishes that on their website, and they're telling us that they will do that in late September, early October. But we are allowed to share that unfinalized data with you tonight and make decisions based on that as well. So tonight I'm joined by Director of Secondary Education, Dr. Brian Brockett, Director of Elementary Education, Director Obsit, and they're going to help me co-present this item tonight, and then we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. As I mentioned before, the SBAC data was not available at the time. This is pretty much finalized data at this point. We don't have currently San Diego County or California data because that has not been published yet, has not been released. So we put up there comparisons to last year's data. So this gives you final results of English language arts, math, and science. At the time that we presented last in June, we were right at 74.5% of target for English language arts. As we looked at data over the summer and students finalizing specific data, it looks like we're going to fall just short of that target. That still represents an increase of about 1.1% over previous year's results in English language arts, but we did not hit our target goal of 2% there. Math, we did hit our target of 62%, and science, we well exceeded our target of 53.8 with a 57% rates. So when you look at the entire scorecard under goal number 1, we met 8 out of the 9 targets, as I mentioned before. The other data point that we did not have available at the time was the percentage of graduates meeting A to G requirements, and it looks like we are at 84% of the graduating class last year, so 2023, meeting A to G requirements. So that puts us at meeting 8 of the 9 targets in this specific area. So when you look at the scorecard all together, 8 of the 9 targets in goal area number 1 were met, 2 out of the 4 targets in goal area number 2, and 2 out of the 3 for a overall success indicator rate of 12 out of 16, or approximately 75%. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brockett. He's going to run you through some other specific data.
Thank you for having us this evening, trustees. Excited to be here to share some positive news about some of the outcomes from our 22-23 school year. I want to start out with the college and career readiness data that's up on the screen right now. Of particular note, Dr. Nye mentioned the 84% A to G completion rate. You can see how that compares. Again, we don't have data on the county and state for last year just yet, but you can see how that compares with previous years. And then another highlight is the AP pass rate. I know that we reported previously post-pandemic, there'd been a little bit of a dip, like a one-year dip there. And we are back up with the most AP exams taken that we have on record since we've been keeping track of those results, and the second highest pass rate we've had in that time since 2007. So super exciting news with students doing great work in those two areas. Summer school, for those students that did struggle during the school year and needed to remediate any of their courses, we did again offer credit recovery summer school at Carlsbad High School this past year. We returned to an in-person model, and this actually helped increase the number of credits earned and completions that we had. You can see that students being in person every day seemed to be highly motivated to finish in the first session there. And so we had students really working hard to get back on track if they had had some challenges during the school year. One thing I want to note out of that data there is the number of Algebra 1 completions dropped over this past summer. I haven't had a chance to dig too deep into that data point yet, but as you are aware, we introduced algebra interventions in different models at both comprehensive high schools last year. And in talking to counselors, we suspect that that was a direct correlation there with the number of students that did not need to remediate Algebra 1 this past summer. I think it's always valuable to highlight kind of what this means, what some of the things that we're doing with students actually looks like for at the student level. And so I've got two quick student highlights for you. One with a middle school student, current 7th grader at Calavera Hills Middle School. And this is a student with significant home life instability and trauma, behavioral concerns and challenges. And as you can see, the school worked on a variety of fronts with interventions, behavior support, school-home communication, reading intervention. And so with all of that work over the course of the year, they felt like significant progress was made in the behavioral concerns, which of course is the foundation of being ready to learn in the classroom. And this student has gone from being in reading support class and having 2 years of gain of Lexile of close to 400 points, and now in 23-24 is in the AVID elective, which is really a next level support for students, which instead of focusing on the core basic intervention pieces, is really designed on helping that student and those students be prepared for college and beyond, to think about their future and start to plan for that. And you can see that with this student, the difference has been made in the outcomes in the academic classes too, with a GPA from 2.8 to 3.5. At the high school level, as I think most of you are aware, we have 9th grade interventions at both high schools, ACES or Lancer Success. And one of the students that I felt like was worth highlighting was a 10th grade student, socioeconomically disadvantaged. Student has had struggles in a variety of areas. Previously had been assessed for special education and ultimately qualified for a 504 plan due to anxiety and ADHD. That student got into Lancer Success for support last year, which provides academic and social emotional support for students, did weekly check-ins with the counselor, and you can see from semester 2 of 8th grade that this student went from a 1.8 to a 2.3 to a 3.6 grade point average at the end of last year with that support. Was able to remediate those 2 Fs in summer school from the first semester and turn first semester Fs into Bs, which doesn't happen very often, I gotta say, is to make that turnaround during the school year. And the teacher was pleased to report that this student is involved in multiple extracurricular activities. And I just think that what I want to highlight with those 2 stories is that there's no simple recipe for intervention for students, right? We're dealing with human beings who have a variety of experiences and backgrounds and abilities, and so there's a lot of pieces, a lot of times that go into that. But it's always exciting to see stories like these. And I'll quickly share one more. I was over at Carlsbad Village Academy last week, and I was meeting with Ms. Payne, the counselor, and a student who graduated last year from CVA, who had had significant academic and behavioral problems kind of that led to her being at CVA, continued to have some challenges there, but graduated last year, and she was in the office. She showed up out of the blue to see Ms. Payne to get some help with her registration to Miracosta College. And so it doesn't always kick in at the moment. It doesn't always kick in when we have them. But I love to see those examples of where we've made a difference with a student who feels like they can come back and still seek the help that they need to help them with their future.
All right, good evening. So I'm going to share a little bit about an elementary student. So this student is currently a 5th grader at Calavera Hills Elementary School. They've actually been there most of their career. So it started in kindergarten, 1st grade, pandemic happened. And so they had sort of poor attendance when schools shut down. They went to CSA for a bit and then returned to Calavera kind of the end of 2nd grade through the present. Because of their academic gaps, they were experiencing some attendance. They had attendance kind of before that happened, but because of the attendance, the academic gaps, they were falling behind, and so had some school avoidance. And that just kind of made those attendance concerns worse, as well as those academic concerns. So the school, looked at the student and put some supports into place. Calavera is fortunate to have the Pass AmeriCorps program, so they have a mentor every year. So that mentor was assigned to work with the student. The student was experiencing attendance concerns. Usually the mentors work with students that have behavior or attendance concerns. Also putting math and language arts interventions into place. So working with the intervention teacher, realizing that, that math was not quite progressing at the same rate that the language arts was, and so added some sort of tier 3 individualized math support. And then also the teacher really worked with the parent on just attendance and ways to get the student more comfortable at school. So you can kind of see the results at the end of the previous year. They were scoring at level 1, so not meeting standards at all on language arts and math on the SBAC. And then at the end of last year, actually improved to a level 3, which is meeting standards. And then attendance has improved as well as decreased that anxiety and that school avoidance. So, and then, she's now participating in class as well. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, as we look at some other data, the state, on the state dashboard, will report out not just overall data on the SBAC, but it will report out that data by race as well as specific other categories: socioeconomically disadvantaged, English language learners, special education are some of the categories that the state will post on its website, which we also include in our LCAP. So this is just a snapshot of a 2-year comparison. This is not cohorted information. So this is just overall information you'll see in the far left. So English language arts, I mentioned, we increased about 1.1% there. It's actually 74.1 versus 74. And you'll see down at the bottom the increase or decrease. And then we just provided information for each of the students based on race as a category. And we did see some good growth with a number of different categories there as well. We still have a significant gap that exists between many of our students of race as well as our overall student population. So that's something that we hope to address in the upcoming school years. So this is English language arts. We saw some similar performances in math as well, but not going to go through each one of these individually. We also did include the same representation here, just in graphical form, if you will. And the black line represents what the information I just showed you. The blue colors, as well as the green, yellow, and red, are the bands, the performance bands that students would enter into. So if the public wants to see, what percentage of students increased in the highest band level, they can see that there, as well as meeting standards, below standards. So this is English language arts. And this is the math summary as well of what we just showed you in the graph. I'll turn it back to Dr. Brockett.
On graduation rates by student group, we've continued to maintain a very strong graduation rate overall. Previously, we've been about 10% above the county average for that. We do continue to see some gaps there as well with our English learners and special ed population down compared to our overall population. So something we're continuing to work in some areas there to be aware of, making sure that they have, those students have opportunities to reach that graduation point. And then we talked previously about UC CSU eligibility rates. The statewide average on this, I should note, is around 50%. We're up at 84% for the class of 2023, which is really outstanding work. And yet we still have a few gaps in there that we can see as well. Our Hispanic students, for example, and our socioeconomically disadvantaged students are meeting that UC eligibility rate at a lower rate than our general student population. So we continue to focus on interventions and supports and opportunities for those student populations as well. On the next slide here, just some back to some college and career readiness demographics, kind of broken out by subgroup. Again, some overall, when we look at our total student population, we see some outstanding work in a variety of areas, everything from grad rate to UC eligibility to AP pass rates, which we discussed. I will note just a couple of quick things here. We're still awaiting the disaggregated data from the College Board, and so we'd be happy to share that at a future point if trustees would like to see that once we have it available to us. The honors AP and community college participation rate that we have looked at as an indicator for a number of years now overall is up to 82%. Again, you can see some discrepancy there with some of our subgroups, and I do want to make a note that we recognize that the special ed number on there, it's 83%, is actually incorrect. We found that the query had been pulling data from the wrong field, and so the number actually is 49.2% of our special ed students have been enrolled in at least one honors AP and community college course. We'll get that corrected in the version of the slide deck that will go up on the website, but I did want to point that out. But overall, again, great opportunities for our students across the board there, including in our career pathways. When we get into action plans for each of the goal items, again, I won't go in depth on all of these. I do want to point out under action plan for goal 1, two important areas, obviously, that we have spent a lot of time discussing are number 1 and 2, our data analysis, our methodology for identifying students for intervention and supports, as well as our MTSS, our continued implementation and build out of our MTSS systems. Those are well underway. With Dr. Ecker leading the way with the MTSS work at both the elementary and the secondary level. It's been great to have that support and focus in that area, as well as number 8 there, the additional elementary intervention teachers who are really hitting the ground running out at the elementary sites, identifying students and really setting in place those methods for working with students and being impactful. And then, we go on, we've got a variety of other items related to different populations, including our English learners. I do want to highlight here our work with our secondary subject area leadership teams. As you're aware, one of our themes this year is strengthening the core. And as we've come out of the pandemic, we've started last spring and are working this year with our secondary leadership teams on focusing on their department vision, their essential learning outcomes, instructional practices, really taking a step back. We've got new teachers on board since the last time we really took a deep dive into those topics. We've got new frameworks, for example, in math that will take a deep dive this year as well. So really kind of strengthening back to those foundational pieces of what we do to help propel all of our other work forward throughout the year.
All right. Excuse me. All right, so kind of digging deeper into the elementary intervention teachers, this slide kind of just shows like some of the work that we've already started. So early in the summer, really just kind of taking a look at like our processes that we had, our flow charts, our forms, the resources that we had available. So a work group of teachers, counselors, psychologists, administrators really just kind of looked at everything, put together specific flow charts for elementary and secondary. Of that process that needs to be utilized at each of the school site, as well as kind of organize our MTSS website, because it was kind of a mixed mass of all kinds of resources. And then we started pulling that list of students once we got our SBAC results and kind of identified a initial group of students, and that's how we determined the funding to allocate to each of the school sites. And then really just kind of worked with the principals individually as a group, like as they reached out to us, to help them really like kind of look at their data, look at their needs, and identify like what the best use of those funds are, like how they were going to organize it. So they submitted plans to us and then made that determination of who to hire, whether it was like a teacher that was on site that they removed from the classroom, backfilled with somebody else that had some experience or expertise in whichever area they were looking for, or hiring a new teacher or continuing with an intervention teacher that they had had in previous years. We've, in our department, have been like working and pulling all kinds of different data reports, so really trying to pull that list of students to target. So we provided that out to the principals and the intervention teachers to look at. We identified, so you'll see on the next slide, but we identified like 675 students based on their scores on the SBAC as well as our Achieve 3000 and then STAR. Students in 2nd through 5th grade that will kind of be our watch list of students that we'll be working with all year. We've been meeting with our principals, giving them that opportunity to collaborate and talk with each other about what they're doing at their site. Again, we reiterate that at every principal meeting. When we do our instructional rounds, we talk to them about that. We've also been meeting with the intervention teachers. They've got a chat going that they are sharing resources back and forth. Like it pings constantly of like, hey, we found this. Like, what about if we do this? So a lot of collaboration. We've invited Michael into like our grade level meetings. And so we'll be also, talking about that when we meet with our grade level leads from each of the school sites. So sort of our focus all year of like, what's everybody doing at each school site? How are we supporting those kids? Back to that strengthening the core. Dr. Ecker's gone out and done presentations for, that's fine, done presentations for several of the school sites. He's got more on the books, but really just kind of hitting it from all angles, so to speak, so that everybody is aware of what our new process is, and then really focusing on those students. So we looked at the students that we identified, and that 674 that I was mentioning actually represents about 14% of all of our K-5 students. So big group of kiddos there that we really want to target and support them. Of that 14%, 30% of them are students that are socioeconomically disadvantaged, and 8.3% are actually English learners also. We've been grappling with what our actual goal for this area is. We've had many discussions in our department. We've looking at that 14% and wanting to decrease that. So, knowing that 100% of those kids are not meeting standards, we want that to be a smaller percentage of students. So decreasing that 674, but I know we've had discussions about like what the best method is to actually calculate that. We've, tossed around, is it like a 5% change or whatever on those assessments? But the way a lot of those assessments are reported and the scores that the students receive out of that makes it really difficult to capture that 5%. We can measure the students as a group of whether like there's more students meeting or not meeting standards. We can look at students' improvement on different assessments. We can look at students that move up a level, but actually narrowing it down to that individual student and that 5% is not, it doesn't seem like it's feasible at this point. So we're still kind of grappling with exactly like what that methodology will look like, but we know we want that 14% to decrease, and we want those students to improve. All right, I think this one is mine as well. Okay, so moving on to goal 2. As Dr. Nye shared earlier, we met 50% of these, and some of it was just the work that we did last year on really working with our DEIB plan that we had hoped when we had set these targets back at the beginning of the previous year that we would actually have that plan in place. But as you know, we worked really hard on that all throughout the year, and we now have a plan, so our targets for next year will be different. And then again, these are just some of the actions that we have for goal 2. I'm not going to read all of them. This one's really focused on just that professional learning and development that we are offering for all of our staff. We see the subject area leadership teams as well as grade levels there as well, because that is really part of that professional development of those teachers. And then really just continuing with like some of our technology programs, implementing our DEIB plan. And then also, we're really excited. We saw that in rounds this morning. We've got our new science materials, so that's super exciting. We were out at school this morning, and kids were dissecting squids along with parents. They were super excited. So really nice that we've got those materials. The teachers were gushing about like how amazing the materials are. And then going on to goal 3. So we met 2 out of the 3 here, as was mentioned earlier. So again, in the second one there, we did increase, we just didn't hit that 2%. And so then continuing some of the actions in this area is really just focused on that. The parent university or SEL curriculum, the additional counselors that we added, the additional counselor that we added at elementary, and then that MTSS process, again, that we have mentioned, I think, pretty much on every goal here because it kind of crosses over all of it. And then just looking at those work-based learning opportunities.
So staff at this time doesn't recommend any changes from our approved goals and success indicators for this upcoming year, the 2023-24 school year. As the board recalls, those were approved on the April 26, 2023 meeting. I've linked those there. We think that we're on the right trajectory as it relates to academic, social, emotional goals, and we would not be recommending any changes at this time. And we'll turn it back over to President Pearson.
This is time for public comment. Have any blue cards been received?
We have one blue card.
Thank you. Okay, when I call your name, please come to the podium, state your name, and indicate whether or not you live within the boundaries of the school district. You will have 3 minutes. The first speaker is Scott Davison.
This week, a report came out analyzing California's educational outcomes as a result of moving to the local control funding formula over a decade ago. Despite the old adage that spending more money on education doesn't improve results, it actually showed that it can if you spend it in the right ways. But it also showed that it takes time, in this case 3 years, for students to be brought up to the grade level benchmarks using a variety of strategies. Interestingly enough, this is the year, 3 years after our prolonged school closures, that most of our COVID relief money will run out. So wouldn't it be great to look back at whether or not the students who fell behind when our schools were closed have actually caught back up, and whether or not we've spent all that money as wisely as other school districts in the state? CUSD has a distinct pattern of not showing how much our students fell behind and not showing whether or not they've caught back up. Why is that? Recently, I heard a former school board member say, school districts do two things well. They protect themselves and they celebrate themselves. And they find ways to celebrate themselves so that they can protect themselves. I smiled because that really does define CUSD. Last year, CUSD sent a Friday newsletter which bragged about our academic performance in comparison to San Diego Unified, one of the worst performing school districts in California, and in comparison to the state overall, one of the worst performing states in America. What we didn't see is a comparison to a school district similar to ours. And what we didn't see was the big drop in academic achievement from this testing, which showed how far our kids fell behind. And what we didn't see was how some schools in CUSD made gains in academics, while some schools fell behind by double digits. What a great way to protect yourself by celebrating yourself. Tonight, we see many more examples of a district celebrating itself to protect itself. We set goals for minuscule improvements that don't seek to remedy the massive learning loss caused by our extended school closures. We see data aggregated for the entire school district that obscures failures at our secondary schools with high marks at some of our elementary schools. We added intervention teachers at elementary levels, but none at the secondary levels where the scores are embarrassingly low. There's nothing in here about chronic absenteeism, which is still at record levels statewide. Our high school students needed 3 years to recover from school closures, according to this study. Are you doing anything to help them just before they graduate, or are you just celebrating yourself to protect yourself?
Staff, do you have anything to add? Trustees, do you have any questions? Well, actually,
You go ahead. And,
no, go ahead. Trustee Williamson.
I believe when you were talking about the 5%, we've kind of had this running conversation, that originally it was going to be that we were hoping that that the proposal was that 5% of the students that are of this 674 students who've been identified, that 5% of them would no longer need intervention, that would be, then our goal would be achieved, which would be about 33 students. And my concern about that is then that leaves a lot of students out, not with no accountability. So I guess my question is, we've talked about some other methodology. Is there no way that we can identify a student getting 5% growth? I guess that's the question.
I think it depends on like the measure. So it's like really difficult on the SBAC to measure 5%, just the way that score is reported. So we can measure whether they've moved like from a 1 to a 2, or 2 to a 3, so that they are proficient. So we can definitely measure that. We can measure growth on the STAR assessment to see like where the student started and whether they improved and that they're closer to that. I know like our data person was like, I'm not sure exactly how that could be. I'd have to think about it, that we may be able to measure that 5%. And then every student, like each grade level has a different cut point for some of those assessments too. And so that was like where she was grappling with, like, I'm not sure like how we actually do that. So there's definitely, I mean, we can all obviously like increase that 5% to a larger number, because we realized too that, just 5%, which I think is what we had mentioned at some point in time, when we actually did the math, is not a lot of kids. So how do we like increase that? Do we want to say we want, 25%, number of kids, again, reducing that number of 674. Like we want fewer kids to be in need of intervention is our ultimate goal. But how we actually state that and then how we measure that, we're still kind of grappling with that.
Trustee Williamson.
Could you, as a follow-up, if we change from the 5% to moving up a band, would that make it on the SBAC for maybe for the 4th and 5th graders? And so that maybe for the younger ones it would be 5%, but maybe for the 4th and 5th graders it would be moving up a band. Would that make sense?
It does. It's that struggle of like where that kid is currently performing, so that student that's really close to moving up to that next band, whether it's a 1 to a 2 or a 2 to a 3, obviously doesn't need as much support. But that student that is far from meeting that next band is going to need a lot more support. So we want to still measure whether they're improving. And so that's what we're grappling with. Like if we just look at, did they, I mean, obviously we want more kids to be in 3s and 4s overall. Like we want fewer kids to qualify for intervention. And we've got multiple measures that we can look at to determine whether they're making progress. But that final cut point of, we can set that target, and we're still going to measure the growth of each of the students in whichever method we're going to do. So I don't know that they answered the question, because we've had so many conversations about this, like as a department team, like trying to figure out like, how do we measure this since we identified students on all these different measures?
I look forward to hearing where you land.
Okay, good.
Just follow up. Okay, Trustee Rawlings.
As a follow-up to that, when you're looking at these students, and you identify them, are you looking at other factors instead of just the test taking? Because some students aren't good in test taking, but they're actually achieving in other areas. Are you looking at that, and then how are you separating those two?
So our data sheet that we actually provided, like to the principals and the intervention teacher, has the students. It has their STAR scores. It has, if that's what it was, it has their SBAC scores if they took it, their Achieve scores. It has their performance on their report card. It also has are they an English learner? Did they have like a disability? We actually pulled some of the students that were receiving services for special education out into another group, still on the spreadsheet, but we're not counting them in there because they're getting services already. But we also like shared, had the principals really look at that, because like you said, maybe there's other factors that we don't know about. We just looked at numbers. And that's like where the principals and the intervention teachers really are digging deep. So we had that starting point of like, let's give them a list. Here's that starting point. But then they know like which students, that those students were kind of just having a bad week, and that may be why that they, something was going on with them at home. And so they may not need as much support, but then other ones need more support.
But are those included here, or have they
They
been
are right
pulled
now,
out?
yes.
Okay, but your plan is
We will still
to-
measure on these students because those are the ones that we identified, but in terms of the services that the principals provide, that may be not all 674 based on, and there may be additional students that they know need intervention that just enrolled or something's happened this year.
And just to follow up, how did you get to the 5%?
I think we talked about it at, like, during our DEIB plan. I think there was a 5% somewhere, yeah. That's where we're like, I don't know where we landed on that one, but that's like where it came up with.
Any other questions related to, I think it's slide 23, actually, on this? Okay. Other questions? Trustee Forbeth.
Well, it's a tag on to Kathy's question to you. So we've identified 674. You're saying that principals, people at the site, the intervention teachers are working with those. Do you think, you provided 3 great examples of students that are making great strides in our district. So what percentage of our 674 elementary students that are needing intervention are receiving it, actually receiving it? Or what, can you speak to that?
Yeah, we don't have that yet. I mean, they're still sort of putting those groups together. So we don't actually have that, but those are some things that we'll be collecting as well, like which are the ones that are actually receiving the services. The other thing that we really are focusing on with the intervention teachers is really, again, that strengthening the core, right? So we're working with our teachers, they're providing coaching, they're providing strategies so that, there's some of these students that may just benefit from interventions in the classroom, like another pull-out reading group or something, and not needing to actually go to the intervention teacher. So we're really trying to put those systems into place of how you support all students, and then providing those additional supports as needed. And so that's also something that we want to be able to measure, like what's the impact of this one-year position? And how do we make sure that we've got those systems in place at each of the schools, so when that person goes away, it doesn't all sort of fall apart.
Trustee Rawlings.
You just made me think of something. So when you filter out those students that maybe don't need the specific intervention, maybe they had a bad day, not great test takers, that's when you're going to apply the 5%, correct? You're not going to include them in the 5% that, they didn't need it, so that's part of our 5% that was reduced.
Yeah, so if we look at our list, once principals have really dug in there and determined that maybe some of those students shouldn't have been on the list, then we'll revise that 674 number if that's the case.
And then the 5%.
Correct. Or whatever percentage we end up landing on, yes.
Unrelated. This is for Dr. Nye. When you were reporting unreported data, and there are success indicators you're going through, some of the reasons why we didn't meet some of the goals on those success indicators, I didn't see anything, the why.
Yeah, I think that I'm trying to think of ones that we didn't meet. English is an example. Overall English we did not meet. We improved. We went up percentage 1.1%, but we didn't hit our overall target of 2%. We haven't dug deeply into the data yet to figure out, are there particular school sites where there's some discrepancies there? Was it a grade level or a specific group of students that didn't perform well? We have a meeting with principals, a K-12 meeting in September, and that traditionally is a data kind of mining meeting where we're going to sit around and look at the data at each of the sites and go over kind of an action plan moving forward for the year. So the others, I know that the social emotional learning goal, as Director Obzid mentioned, we did hit several of the categories. We increased over fall to spring results, but we didn't, again, hit the overall target. So we were increasing our graduate profile awareness, but we weren't hitting our targets. So, the DEIB goal is another example of we were certainly working towards putting a plan in place, but the the metric was to get it in place, obviously, at the start of the last school year, which we did not accomplish. So that's another example of not meeting a particular target.
And just to follow up, do you look at cohorts in terms of how they improved or didn't improve?
Yes. So we provide a ton of information to school sites. One of those is cohorted information. So they'll get cohort information on SBAC in particular of their students that tested in grade 3 as an example on how they performed over 3rd grade to 4th grade. We'll do pivot tables for individual school sites. So they'll be able to see students that grew bands from one year to the next, as well as students that declined in bands from one year to the next. They can break that down to the grade level and all the way down to the teacher level if need be, and a principal wants to dig into that data to try to figure out is there a teacher that's doing something particularly well that can share that with other teachers on best practices, or are there a cluster of students that aren't performing for whatever reason? So that's all data that is provided to principals. Again, that'll happen at the September meeting coming up for the K-12 meeting.
Trustee Verbeff.
I had asked staff about the number of middle school and high school students that are not meeting standards, and how many of them are we providing intervention plans for? So I just would like to see if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so I just ran some quick numbers in regards to middle school students not meeting the SBAC this last year in English language arts. We had approximately 1,400 middle school students not at grade level standards, and that's 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and another 215 high school students not meet, and obviously that's only one grade level, grade 11, for those students not at grade level. I would say that certainly a good majority of those students are receiving interventions. At the high school level, it's a little bit different because we're only testing at that one grade level. So we're looking at a combination of things, not just the SBAC, but we're looking at grades, specifically at the secondary level. We're also looking at their performance on common assessments, at the high school level, we also have other metrics that students take, math-specific courses or math-specific tests that they're taking that teachers are looking at to provide intervention as well. So it's a combination of things that are identifying students in need of intervention. I would say the types of intervention at the high school and middle school level vary. There's a number of different things that we have, all the way down to Read 180 and Math 180 classes, tutoring classes, before and after school tutoring, as well as a number of different interventions in school. Dr. Brockett had mentioned the Lancer Success at the 9th grade level at Carlsbad High School. We also have APEX, which is a credit recovery program that students can recoup credit during the school year at the high school levels at both Sage Creek and Carlsbad High. So there's a number of different interventions academically. There's also social emotional interventions with counselors.
Question on how do you measure anxiety? You said that anxiety went up or down, but I'm interested in how do we measure anxiety in our students?
Yeah, I don't think there's a formal way to measure anxiety. We do monitor and track students that we see for various reasons. I know Wellness Together provides us a report every year about the types of students that they're seeing and the reason why they're seeing students. I can tell you anxiety is the number one reason high school students in particular that Wellness Together gets referrals for. So they monitor and track that, and then they provide resources for that student and their family beyond if we have resources at our school side as well.
All right. I just add to that in addition, for the general student population, I know I met with both of our high school counseling teams today, and they both talked about the work that they're doing this year and have been doing over the past few years to do proactive, being out in classrooms, doing lessons with students. So one of the things that they talk about, among a variety of things, would be, how to cope with anxiety and stress and things like that in, that social emotional learning piece. So I know the same is true at the middle school level, and even we see it in elementary where they do things as basic as just sort of tracing a drawing or whatever it may be to help bring, that stress level down. So I think we're seeing it across the board in a variety of ways being addressed. But yeah, the measurement, you might have to get a professional in that area to be able to speak to that.
Trustee Rawlings.
As a follow-up, someone doesn't have to be diagnosed with anxiety in order to be included in the measurement, correct?
No, that's correct.
And then I just have one final question. I did notice in reporting out graduation rates year over year, there were certain groups that actually dropped pretty significant. Do you have any reasons why for that?
We haven't taken a deep dive into those numbers. One of the things that I do want to point out about those specific numbers is it's important to remember those are cohort numbers. So that's your cohort that starts in ninth grade and then continues through for 4 years. We're doing some work right now actually to re-examine how we track our cohorts and making sure that we're addressing if a student leaves the cohort that we're properly accounting for them. There's a variety of reasons why a student might leave Carlsbad, for example, and not and not be removed from our cohort if we're not able to verify their enrollment somewhere else. So a portion of that graduation rate, at least, is accounted for because of the nature of the measure being a 4-year cohort rate. We have very few students like this year graduation rate. We have very few non-grads year in and year out. That's just a small handful of kids who in most cases we're working with to graduate. If they don't graduate in June, we're working with them to graduate over the summer. Some of the specific areas where it may have dropped, a couple of things to think about is between 22 and 23. For the class of 22, we still had AB 104 in effect, which gave sites greater flexibility in terms of graduation requirements and working with students. So there's a possibility that impacted some of those student numbers in terms of the students that we did have. And then some of those areas are relatively smaller groups of students. So, a couple students one way or the other can make what looks like a relatively bigger difference.
And that's what I would say is that when you look at your performance of drops, English language learners as an example, you're talking about a sample size of only 33 students. So that could mean 1 or 2 students in that particular group that shifts that significantly, right? So, that the end number is also significant when you look at these groups.
Any other questions, trustees? Okay, well, thank you.
Is there going to be any discussion? Is there going to be discussion?
Yeah, let me see. Yes. Go ahead, Trustee Williamson.
Thank you. And I should have said thank you for answering the questions that I had beforehand, Dr. Nyan. I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that my fellow board members are aware the A to G pass rate, when Ed Trust West came and worked with us a number of years ago, and when they first recommended that we have A to G be a high school graduation requirement, there were people in our district who thought that that was a horrible idea. And that because they said that this is not fair to some of our subgroups, that they won't be able to, that it will keep them from graduating from high school. And I just wanted to make sure that you had that background, because at the time, I think our A to G graduation rate was in the 40s of most of our, I think it was typically in the 40s. And we have not only moved up the entire population, but if you look at the subgroups, the A to G graduation rate is actually quite good. And so I think that we need to keep that in mind, that sometimes, something that on the surface might look like it's a really bad idea for students. And I believe it probably was a very good recommendation and was, when you talk about equity, it was absolutely what we should have been doing all along. And I'm very glad that we did that because it kept the standards and the goals high for all students. I just wanted to bring that up. And then the second thing is, I just want to make sure that my fellow board members are in agreement that we do want to have for these 674 students, that we do want to make sure that they are all being looked at, that we want them all to be making the measurable progress. We don't just want to have 5% of them no longer need interventions. Because anyway, I just want to make sure that I was not the only one who was, that was important too, that we are looking at all of those students. So that's.
Trustee Rawlings.
And I would agree. I just, again, I don't want to be providing interventions for a student that's having a bad day or that, you know, just isn't a good test taker, but has, you know, it wouldn't be A's, I guess it's, you know, but is making progress at grade level. It just didn't do well on a test. So I just want to make sure that that gets filtered out. So we are focusing our resources as much as possible for those students that truly need the intervention, because I think we'll far surpass the 5% if we do that.
Other discussion? I'd just like to add, and I agree with you, Trustee Rawlings, on that, is that we don't want to just play with numbers and everything. We really want to impact a large amount of things. So, don't want to get caught in definitions of that. It's really about the kids. And so the only thing I guess I'm a little bit concerned about is how we explain, what's working and what's not working. So I'm interested either in a report or that when you get together in your September K through 12, and everybody comes to agreement on this is what we need to do to improve on certain things, that not just me, but my fellow trustees, we would have something to say, this is what the plan is. That, I think that'd be helpful. Well, what the improvements are.
This is discussion with the board, so I'm wondering, do you need thumbs
So
for this?
what
Or
I'm
I'm trying to
asking-
figure out what you're asking us.
Okay.
Thank you.
So my discussion with you is it important for you, for each of you to see when they have the September meeting, K through 12, how they report out to us, what the improvements are going to be?
You talking the June meeting or the September meeting?
No, they're having a
'Cause
September meeting, K through 12. That's what Dr. Knife said.
Okay, so what you're requesting is that do you?
I'm not because I'm asking. Is that important to the rest of the trustees?
Could you clarify what it is that you're wanting to hear? I'm not sure what you were
So we have
in
success
September.
indicators, right? We had them reported. What we didn't have report is how are you going to improve those? What I understand from the information was in the September meeting, they're going to talk about all that and then talk about what the plan's going to be going forward. What I said was, what I asked, is that important to all of you to hear what that is going to be? Does that clarify?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I would agree, because it sounds like we're still trying to figure out what multiple measures we're using, what the cut points are, because I think you stated that they're different from site to site. So I think after that meeting, it would be nice for us to hear, and just to piggyback on what you're saying, what the consensus is and what interventions you're all going to be focused on and how you're going to measure that and what the plan is. I would like to know that.
And Dr. Brockett kind of teased a little bit that you want to talk about maybe some disparities between school sites, right? In this conversation, I think it was you, Dr. Brockett. That maybe you would be having conversations between principals talking about what's working and what maybe could be added to a different site to maybe look at what disparities, why there are disparities between some of our sites, right? I think that might be
So
valuable.
let me back up a little bit to Trustee Rawlings. This is a discussion within discussion. Just to keep focused on this. Back to, I know there's two of us that would like to have that. So I'm looking for thumbs, because this is a discussion item. How many trustees are interested in reporting back from the September meeting? Trustee Rawlings.
Can I ask a question of staff?
Oh, you want to shift now to staff?
Well, I'm
Okay.
asking permission of the chair.
Go ahead, Trustee Brown.
If I recall, I believe you do kind of a mid-year point that you bring back information to the board. Isn't that included as far as the way you're going to look at improving at the mid-year report?
We do a mid-year report that talks about kind of where we're at. But we also do, if you recall, we have a data commitments refresh cycle. And so one of the things we do at the September meeting is that we put reflections from each principal on how they did on their WIGs for the previous year. And we share that, we compile all that information. And in that, they're sharing, did we meet our academic WIGs? If not, why not? And they're putting information in there. So certainly we can commit to doing that for each of the school sites, and then also commit to really solidifying the intervention plan at the elementary school, and provide you with the action plan, what it's going to look like at the various school sites, so we can shore up that as well. So I think both of those will get after what President Pearson was initially requesting.
I didn't see
believe.
yet 3 thumbs for that or more for that.
The reason I'm asking that, because I'm not sure exactly what you're asking for. Are you asking for an additional report? And if so, at what time after the September meeting amongst staff? So that's why I'm hesitating, because I'm not sure exactly what you're asking for.
Well, I try to explain it. So as far as timing, it'd be the timing that reasonability test to Dr. Nye, when you could provide that to the trustees, to the board.
Yeah, we could, at the end of September, I believe we say that we will update the board on the data commitments on the site WIGs for each of the school sites. And we could, at the same time, also provide you with the action plan, if you will, of the intervention at the elementary school, including targets.
Okay, so how many thumbs do I see? Okay. Dr. Nye? Okay. Trustee Verbeth?
Well, I'd like to continue to discuss, I had asked Dr. Nye about the intervention needs at the middle school and the high school level, and he had reported back the number of 11th graders, and that would be our current 12th graders. So that's 215 students that didn't meet. So I just would like to hear back more, because these are going to be our future graduates in a few months. So I would just like to get some feedback on those particular students and what we're doing at the high school level, because we're talking about elementary a lot, but I'd also like to talk about secondary and get some reports back from that, because I think it's important when we look at our graduation rate.
So you're asking all the trustees, how many agree with you on that?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Trustee Rawlings.
When would you want that report, and what would you like included in that report?
Well, I think it could be similar data to what we're, and the similar timing regarding the elementary, so whenever it's,
That, just to clarify, it wasn't just elementary. Oh,
I
that-
thought they said elementary.
The K, it was K through
For their
12, you're
intervention.
having me in September.
What's the question? I'm sorry.
okay.
Yeah, we provide a report from every principal at all the sites on their WIGs, their goals from last year, and they give a reflection on did they meet their goals or not, why they felt they met their goals, why they felt they didn't, and that's part of what we do annually. So high school principals would be reporting out. Whether or not it gets to the specificity of those 200 kids, and I don't think it does, but yeah.
I guess I'm just very interested in what intervention strategies we're providing to those 215 kids, because they're going to be graduating this year. So if they're not meeting standards, like how are we helping them to get to that level so that we graduate kids who are meeting standards?
But you're, may I-
Go ahead,
may I
Trustee Ward.
ask? Okay. But the 200 is also based on SBAC, correct? Because it's only 11th grade, so that test is given in the spring, so if
Can't
they're
really get
looking
that
at that, right. So it would have to be something, and that's 200 with both high schools in total?
Yeah, and that was only English language arts. I would imagine we had probably, I didn't look at math, but we'll probably have a little bit higher number in math. Some of those are the same kids,
Right.
right? So, yeah,
And it's both high schools, you said.
correct.
So it might be a little bit heavier on the Carlsbad High School side than Sage, but, and it's at the end of the year, so it might be kind of hard to base it on that in terms of intervention support. So it would be they would have to track something else, because it would have to be at the beginning of the year.
Trustee Rawlings.
And I was just going to say, too, that we would still have the same, I think, the same situation that, that they didn't meet standards on that particular test on that particular day, but, you know, they could be an honors English, you know, or an AB English or what have you. I mean, I know many students that don't do well on tests, but again, are in, you know, higher level, so they're meeting standards and they will graduate and they'll meet the A through G standards. So, but I hear what you're saying, and I would be willing to support, you know, how you're tracking how you're tracking it, and then to make sure that those students are getting the assistance they need in their senior year. Is that what you're asking for?
That's what I'm
And then
asking
you want
for.
it the same timeline as, or would there
Well,
be
we're
a
clearly
different
not going to get
timeline?
more SBAC data, right? But we could get other data.
I think it might make more sense, not necessarily to get bye, Lisa. It might be better to have a conversation about looking at students that are coming into high school and where they're at. So, you know, maybe they're going to base it on a certain class or a cohort of students and see how they do and use some type of measure as they track and go through high school. But I don't think it would really make sense. You know, a high-stakes test like SBAC, you know, puts a lot of pressure on kids. They might not get the best performance and the best, most accurate data because they take it once in high school. So it might be something else. But I'm sure that they do that in high school. The teachers and everybody are paying attention to students that need more support, and I'm sure they're providing interventions at the secondary level.
So we still need 3 thumbs for where you were going with that. Trustee Verbath and Trustee Rawlings, you weighed in on what you thought you would agree to. I think I heard you say.
I was asking about timing, and we're not sure about the timing, because I realize staff, you know, has a lot of work to do as well. And, you know, when would that be appropriate to bring it up, where it would have the impact that I think you're looking for? So before I could agree, I'd want to know those specifics.
Well, I think it's important that we, you know, look at our middle school kids as they feed into high school, but I'm trying to put a cohort together of our 11th grader, or our 12th graders now who are going to be graduating, and what assistance they need. So whatever timeline would be appropriate, it's just making sure that we're capturing these students and we're providing support. So I'm not looking for it this month, but I think it would be appropriate for us to keep track of these students and see what
Can I-
interventions we're providing.
Can I ask a question?
Trustee Ward, go ahead.
Yeah. May I
You-
ask?
yeah, sure.
Okay. Staff, maybe you can speak to how you support students with various interventions at the secondary level, and and also kind of curious, the 200 students, has that changed over time? I mean, is it more now than it has been? I mean, I know we went through COVID, but,
Yeah, I would have to look and see how big that number has fluctuated over time. I just looked based on Trustee Verbath's question today, so we looked at high school and middle school specifically for English language arts. We have a various number of interventions. I was just talking with Dr. Brockett on, you know, how we could maybe take a look at the cohort of kids that were not meeting standards on SBAC math and English language arts in the 11th grade year. And maybe there's a way that we could see of those students, which students received interventions between their junior and senior year, and what types of interventions they received. It would, it would take a little bit of digging for us to see, part of that is relying on the sites to actually be recording the interventions that they're receiving. So if a student goes to after-school tutorial, as an example, I'm not confident right now in that we're recording that in a SIS system that we can monitor and track. So I would want to check with high school principals just to make sure that there's a way for us to monitor and track that. I would say as well, the idea that, what we're hyper-focused on at the high school level is grades. And we want to make sure that students graduate having met A to G standards, which is our graduation requirements. And so while the SBAC is one point in time, if students are passing their grades, it means that they're meeting standards in those classes. And so that is the ultimate kind of measurement or predictor on how well students are going to do on life beyond high school.
I was just thinking about that too, and I'm just wondering too if you can kind of go backwards a little bit, and if you're looking at, like, let's say you have 150 students at Carlsbad High School, if you can kind of look back to see the kids that weren't at grade level standards, are these the same kids that weren't meeting their grade level standards their freshman, sophomore, junior year, and then there's still no improvement when they get to the SBAC? That might be, I mean, is that typical? Is that what happens? But if that's not what's happening, it might be something else. But if you're seeing the kids that hit 11th grade not meeting grade level standards, what support have those kids received in the previous years? And has nothing changed? And if that's consistently what's happening at the secondary level, then maybe something different needs to be done from 9th to 11th grade when they hit 11th and take that test. Does that make sense?
So Trustee Ward, before we direct, if you're saying something different than Trustee Verbeth, we still want to get 3 thumbs. We're still in this discussion portion. So if we want, majority of the current trustees here.
I'm not asking anything. It was just a thought.
Oh, okay, so you're not, Trustee Rawlings.
Trustee Verbeth, would that satisfy what you're looking for?
Yes, it would. I just want to continue the dialogue and track these kids that are coming out of middle
Okay.
school into high school. Yeah.
Trustee Rawlings.
And how much staff time would that take?
I don't know right now, because I don't know the level in which we're accurately tracking interventions for students, but I certainly think a good step could be looking at students who are not passing, as an example, their math classes in 9th grade year, their their math classes in 10th grade year, and then their performance on the SBAC versus conversely, are we seeing students that are passing their math classes in the 9th and 10th grade year, but for some reason not passing the SBAC? So we can look at some of that data. It wouldn't be quick. I think for us to turn something around for that would take us a good month or 2. Yeah.
And maybe it's not everybody. Maybe it's just a group cohort that you're looking at to see what the impacts are and then
Okay, so
changing the interventions.
is everybody clear what Trustee Verbeth, what you're requesting? So, okay, so how many thumbs do we have for that?
I'm sorry. Is staff clear on what the trustee request is? Because I'm not, and I've not taken
Okay, so let's
adequate
repeat
notes. I'm
it.
sorry.
Let's-
I don't have anything to
Unless
repeat, so
Dr.
Dr.
Nye.
Nye.
I'll try to attempt it. I think what staff is going to go back and do is look at math and English language arts for 9th and 10th grade students and do a projection of students that either have D's or F's in their math class and their English language arts class. And we're going to work backwards from last year's 11th grade class. So we're going to track and monitor and work back from students and then, I'm not giving you the right words. We're going to look at ninth and 10th grade students and look at their grades and then compare that to their SBAC scores in grade 11 and see if we can find any patterns there. And then we're also going to try to match up whether those students received interventions along the way. Trustee Rawlings.
And then report that back to the board,
That's correct.
your findings.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. So thumbs for that record. Trustee Ward, we were doing thumbs. Oh, okay, I just want to check for your, okay. Dr. Churchill, do you understand?
Not really, but I trust Dr. Nye.
Okay. We're going to move on, if that's okay with everybody.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Item 7.2, 2022-23, unaudited actuals financial report. Proposition 30, education protection account, expenditure report and resolution number 10-2324, adopting the GAN limit for 2022-23 and 23-24. Trustees, this is a discussion action item. I will hand it over to Mr. Dill.
Thank you. I'm glad that was a long item to read because I'm adjusting back and, yeah, okay. I just need to kick Dr. Nye off of the, off of the screen here, actually. I need to do one more movement here. All right. No. I know. Yeah, that's what I thought I did. Hang on. I know how to do it. No. Hang on. Cast screen. All right. I knew I'd get there. I think I need one more agenda item between Dr. Nye and me to get everything correct, so. Thank you. Good evening, trustees. Tonight, I'm presenting the results of the 2022-23 unaudited actuals. Once we end the fiscal year, it takes us about a month and a half to go through and close all of the accounts and do the final settlement of where we've landed. What I will usually say at this time of the year is every time we bring a budget to you, it is our best estimate at that time. It's based off of assumptions that we knew then, and this is why we bring back different iterations of the budget throughout the year, because as those assumptions change, we change the budget. And then we get to unaudited actuals, and I tell you what really happened. And so these are typically the real numbers for the entire year, and why sometimes I'll say I'll tell you next August how much we have to spend today. There will be an asterisk to this report, though, and I will get into that, and it relates to the status of our contract agreement with LIUNA, which is causing a wrinkle in what we are reporting tonight and what we may be reporting as our final audited actuals when we come back in December. So, three main themes for this evening. We saw an increase in revenue, and that was expected at the very end of the year as the Budget Act was passed, and the legislature and administration restored dollars that we assumed were going to be cut mid-year. So we've reflected that in the unaudited actuals. I'll be explaining all this in more detail as we get through. We did include the value of the salary increases with CUDA, LIUNA, and management. And then when we really look back at what happened last year versus the year before, so the 21-22 school year, what stands out? And the biggest jump was in services, and specifically in special education transportation and special ed agency services, and then also our utilities. So I'll be talking through all of those things as we go through. At a very high level, this is the summary, all-in revenue, all-in expenditures, the beginning and ending fund balance. I'll break this apart, but as you can see, increase in revenue, again, that's the Arts and Music Instructional Materials Block Grant, the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, both restored. That was put in. Expenditures, we had an increase because we added the value of those salary increases at the end of the year that we did not have at audited actuals. And we'll go through that. This is just the history. I show this to you every time we come to you with a budget report or the unaudited actuals. The unaudited actuals would be the second to last group of bars there, so you can see more revenue than we took in expenditures all in, but that was predominantly on the restricted side of the general fund budget, which shows that increase in the black bar, which is the restricted ending fund balance. Just looking at two different pie charts, revenue and expenditures, where we get the money and how we spend it. Of course, local control and funding formula and property tax is the majority of our funding. Other state, the orange slice there is larger for last year than it will be in the upcoming year, because that represents those two big one-time block grants that we do not get this year. So that'll shrink and blue will grow when I come back a year from now and show you how we ended this year. On the expenditure side, this is pretty typical in terms of the spread of how we spend the dollars, except the gray slice of services did grow last year because of those areas that I spoke about at the top of this, and we'll go into more detail in a moment. Breaking apart the revenue by the major categories here, just some minor changes to property tax and federal revenue. That's typical and very minor comparatively to the big dollar amounts that we have for the full revenue. On the local revenue, that represents insurance proceeds that we haven't received yet. So claims that we filed last year specifically for repair work we did at Buena Vista Elementary School and the Carlsbad High School gym. We booked that revenue for the claim settlement. It hasn't hit yet. Actually, we got half of the Carlsbad gym this week, so that'll be scored against this year's revenue. So that's the drop. You normally do not see a drop in local revenue at year end. It was essentially the claim settlements that we hadn't received yet. And then on the state side, that big jump in the middle, precisely what I spoke about with the restoration of the two big block grants. This is, in more words, what I have already explained to you, so I won't explain this slide any further regarding the block grants. One thing we are pointing out, just an update on our attendance rates, and so this is not enrollment, this is the percentage of students who attend on a daily basis compared to our enrollment, and how we stack up. The dotted line in the middle is pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Also, there's a gap in the years that are reported there, because in the 2021 school year, attendance was not reported statewide. So we don't have data that we can share on a statewide basis there. So you can see before and after, definitely a drop in daily attendance. There was a rebound in the previous year, 22-23, but we're still not back in terms of daily attendance where we were pre-pandemic. And this is, as you can see with the statewide numbers, they're seeing more or less the same trajectory. As I talk to my colleagues, this is something that everybody statewide is suffering in all districts. And really, when we look back to last year, 2 years ago in 21-22, we thought that was an anomaly. That was the Omicron surge year when we had such low attendance in the spring or winter and spring of 21-22. We thought we would fully rebound, haven't quite yet, and frankly, it's behaviors have changed. And when students in the past had the sniffles, maybe they went to school, now they don't. And parents are keeping their kids, they're doing what we told them to do prior to the pandemic of keep your child home if they're sick. We think that there's more of that going on. And so we're really not sure when we have conversations at the state level whether this is the new normal or something like it, and this is really what attendance rates should have been. However, we want to stress to families that school attendance is important. I know President Pearson sent a letter out to families last week talking about all the reasons why attendance is important. So, this is a goal to every tick up we have in our ADA percentage is additional dollars that we would receive in the local control funding formula. So that's information. On the expenditure side, you can see from where we were at estimated actuals to actuals, we didn't have the value of the salary settlements, and so we plugged those dollars in. That's net of any other savings that we might have had because of vacant positions and other savings that we would typically see at the end of the year. And then for the rest of the categories, books and supplies, services, we did capture savings there. Red is good on this slide. Usually red's bad everywhere else I show it to you, but it's good on this one. And so it is typical that we do capture savings at the end of the year in those books and supplies and services categories. That's what we saw this year. I will note, though, particularly in services, we did increase those budgets mid-year. Particularly in the special ed categories and the utilities categories, as we saw our expenditures above what we had estimated at the beginning of the year. We adjusted upward, and then we brought it back down when we paid the bills. So in speaking about the salary assumptions, even though we will be paying retro salary adjustments to CUDA and management in this year, it's accounted for in the prior year because that was last year's salary settlement. So as we were closing the books, we put the value of that into last year's budget as if it had happened in that budget. This is accrual accounting, and this is the way that it's done. We also, on the eve of closing, had reached a tentative agreement with LIUNA, and we calculated the value of that. We also accrued that value back to the prior year. Had spoken with our auditors in the County Office of Education. They advised us to do it that way. However, subsequently last week, we learned that LIUNA had not approved the tentative agreement. We did not have time to adjust the unaudited actuals, go in and rebalance every one of our accounts to pull that value out. And so right now, the value of that salary settlement appears in the unaudited actuals. If by the time we close our audit with our independent auditors, if we don't have a tentative agreement reached or a full contract settlement and agreement reached, we may adjust last year's expenditures down to pull that assumption out. And any agreement that we would reach with LIUNA would be scored against this year's actuals. So this is all accounting speak, but this is the first time I've come to a board and said, this is not entirely, or this might not be entirely accurate. This is not entirely reflective of what happened last year. However, under our accounting rules and assumptions, this is how it was prepared, and it could still be the final version when we come back to you in December. Either way, the audited actuals will be the most accurate reflection of what occurred last year. So in just talking about the other expenditure categories where we saw increases, I mentioned increased support for students with disabilities did lead to higher costs across the year. We did see non-public agency costs. These are the service providers, not the non-public schools where we sometimes have students placed. That increased. And so the biggest category there were instructional assistants. When we were not able to find staff to fill those vacancies, we had to contract out for those services. It's a much higher cost. And so that cost kept creeping up throughout the year. There's some other categories in there as well for medical service providers and others who also had raised their rates. The transportation costs, additional students had qualified for transportation, so we, in order to meet our obligation to provide transportation, we had to increase that as well. But there were good news. I don't want to beat up on special education. One, we believe in providing the services. But two, non-public school tuition and residential placement those were reduced. And that's good news because that actually means that we're bringing students back into our programs when we see reductions in those programs. So there was some good news in special education. Didn't quite offset some of the bad news that I mentioned, but it just shows the great work that they're doing over there with providing services. And attorney costs additionally decreased as well. So even as we were bringing students back, we weren't being challenged for the reasons to do that. So some good and some not so great in special education budgeting and expenditures. I'll talk a bit about utilities. As I mentioned, when we compared to the previous year, our utilities and trash increased in total by about $1 million last year. And so in looking at SDG&E, water, and recycling, what are the trends there? I will be bringing back some additional information specifically about solar and savings. We may have some information from our contractor that installed that by early October, so I can bring in some comparative data. But if you just look at the blue line and see way back to 2018, and then the next 2 years when we were fully open, you saw a pretty good drop in just the dollars that we were spending. We saw a big spike this year. That includes that surge in natural gas prices that everyone saw. And so I have staff going through the bills right now, pulling out the gas costs, just looking at the electrical consumption so that that can support that analysis that we're doing on site by site, solar, non-solar. How are we doing with both our energy consumption and also the projects that we're doing with Measure HH, which are intended to lower our consumption, notwithstanding the solar production that we're doing. The water, we really took a look at that because we saw dips and spikes, and it really does seem to coincide with when we do major field rehabilitation. So when we actually went back and looked critically, it makes sense that we saw these highs and lows. With recycling, we are diverting more waste away from the general landfill and into recycling and organic, but that also means that more trash trucks have to come and pick up those additional bins. And so we are working with the waste hauler to improve our sorting and also to reduce the number of trips per site so that we can reduce that trash cost. So we're doing good work on trash, and it is leading to more pickups for trash. So that's the work to be done in this upcoming year, and our maintenance staff and custodial staff are doing that work right now. Okay, so the general fund balance comparison, again, looking at where we had assumed we would be at the estimated actuals versus unaudited actuals. You can see the net change, and we do have a net deficit on the unrestricted side. It really is the contributions that we made towards all of those services from the unrestricted to the restricted side. Also the salary settlements. It's really everything. It's not one thing, it's everything that leads to that unrestricted deficit on that side. On the restricted side, the surplus really is the intended receipt of the one-time state block grants last year that we intended to carry over into this year to support the certificated staff who were funded by ESSER and other COVID relief dollars. So these were counselors and other intervention teachers. And then also using the discretionary block grant for upcoming textbook adoptions and the additional intervention teachers that were approved by the board in June. So all of those dollars we intended all year long, even though the revenue was changing, we had always intended to carry that into this year. And so we were always showing a surplus on the restricted side from holding those state dollars with the intention of using them this year. What that means is we'll see an inverse of that. We'll see a deficit on the restricted side this year because the money came in last year. We're spending it this year. However, the fund balance will be still thriving and protected. So our next steps, we'll be back in December with the first interim report, and there will be lots of adjustments, as we typically see when we go from the beginning of the year to first interim. We will be, since the salary increases for CUDA and management and potentially LIUNA came in late, We will be incorporating those into this year's budget because they were not included at adopted. We will adjust the property tax estimate, start looking at enrollment versus attendance rates, and start projecting out our future revenue as we lead into the budget adoption cycle, which will follow the next month in January when we start that process. And the actual audit report will be back to you in December. So with that, I am ready to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. This is time for public comment. Have any blue cards been received?
We have one blue card.
When I call your name, please come to the podium, state your name, and indicate whether or not you live within the boundaries of the school district. You will have 3 minutes. The first speaker is Scott Davison.
I note that spending is up in last year's revised budget, driven primarily by an increase in salaries and benefits. I hope this isn't a pattern of things to come. I note that there are some hints about financial trouble ahead and some notable omissions of some key data that would tell us what to expect in the coming budget year. First, enrollment. We haven't received the enrollment numbers for the first day of school, indicating the number of students and staff at CUSD that is usually presented in a colorful infographic. Just to note, despite Dr. Churchill's statement a few minutes ago, we still haven't. Did you catch his trick? He didn't give us the overall enrollment number, but rather an apples to oranges comparison of our day one number to the October count from last year, but not the raw data. Why? Because the October number is always lower, which means we've likely lost even more students than he wants to admit. And this is in spite of us adding an entire grade of TK students, which should have boosted our enrollment numbers in the first place. So despite predictions of flat enrollment, we now see that it's actually down. Despite Dr. Churchill now claiming that this was expected due to low birth rates, CUSD just a few months ago was still predicting flat enrollment at CUSD in spite of this known birth rate issue. So hopefully the board hasn't forgotten this clever change in messaging we're now receiving tonight from their superintendent. Have we adjusted staff as a result of this unexpected decrease? How are our staffing levels and class sizes in comparison? A company facing lost profits reduces employees to stem the bleeding and maintain fiscal responsibility. If we want to talk about funding and academic achievement, where is our data on chronic absenteeism? Last week, many of us attended an important community event where a director at Oceanside Unified talked in detail about the consequences, both financial and academic, of chronic absenteeism. He went into detail about the rates at OUSD, the causes, and what they're doing about it. Their solutions are varied and intense, just like the causes. But what is the chronic absenteeism rate in CUSD? You wouldn't know from coming to a board meeting. Those of us who do know where to find those numbers know it's bad. In 2019, chronic absenteeism was in the single digits, but by 2021 to 22, we had skyrocketed to over 20%. Now, we all know the reason that it got this bad in the first place: crazy COVID restrictions like mandatory quarantines for unvaccinated kids and forcing every child to stay home when they had a runny nose. Some districts have set out to try and fix this. LAUSD already told kids at the beginning of the school year that they should come to school even if they have the sniffles, because this obsessive safety culture has devastated attendance, ADA funding, and academic outcomes. Has CUSD analyzed the rates of chronic absenteeism as Oceanside has and determined what messages to send to parents to encourage higher attendance and better financial and academic outcomes? Or has CUSD been so consumed with DEI, ethnic studies, and other political distractions that it's neglected its primary mission, now reflected in increased costs, decreased enrollment, and decreased funding? Thank you.
Staff, do you have anything to add?
Not at this time.
Trustees, do you have any questions? Trustee Rawlings and then Trustee Ward.
Thank you. On slide 5, you show a comparison between revenue and expenditures as far as percentages go. Can you outline what the ending balance and/or reserves is as part of the expenditures in percentages?
Okay. So here you would see, if you're looking at all in 41 million in total reserves, compared against 172 million. I can do the math quickly. The main thing that I look at is the unrestricted ending balance as compared and not the total. But if we're just doing big round numbers, that'd be 24%. That's just big round numbers. But in terms of the unrestricted,
Oh, no, my question was, how does it relate to the chart that you showed for expenditures? So it would be 24%, so you have certificated salaries is 41%, and you have the reserve at 24%?
I've never done that analysis of looking at the total reserve percentage as a comparison to the total of how we spend our dollars. Is that what you're asking?
Well, it counts as an expenditure, doesn't it? When you have
Yeah, but
revenues,
I've-
and then when you do your budget, doesn't it count as expenditures on the other side?
But the ending balance isn't revenue, it's savings. So the ending.
But as far as, when you're looking at this chart, that obviously
Mm-hmm.
doesn't equal 100%. So the rest of, anything that's not there is reserve, which you said it's about 24%. So that would be, in comparison, we have 24% in reserve, and we have 41% certificated, 12% classified. Would that be accurate?
Again, I don't look at it in those terms of the percentage of the reserve to the percentage of expenditures and revenue. Normally, when we look at the percentage of the ending balance, you're looking at either the total unrestricted ending balance or the total general fund ending balance as a percentage of your expenditures, not individually salaries or benefits or any of the components of that.
But it's still a percentage as it relates to revenue, correct?
Again, we look at it in terms of expenditures, not revenue. We look at the ending balance as a percentage of revenue, not as a percentage of expenditures,
Okay, so it's 24% of revenue.
of expenditures,
Of expenditures or revenue?
expenditures.
Okay, so 24% is committed to reserves as expenditures, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Ward.
Basically, if I could clarify, so what we're looking at is, if you were to take all of our costs and compare that to how much we have in savings, we have 24% of our budget is in savings. We don't look at it in terms of revenue, if that makes sense.
Trustee Ward.
I was just wondering about the Prop 28 funds and where we were with that. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't hear, I wasn't
Yeah,
correcting, I
okay.
just didn't hear. Prop 28 is this year, not last year. And so that would not be reflected here
Mm-hmm. Oh,
in
I
the
know, I know.
unaudited
I was
actuals.
just curious.
Yeah, and as far as Prop 28 goes for this year, we still have an estimate, not technically an apportionment letter from CDE. And so we've not reflected that in the current adopted budget that you saw. It should be adjusted by the time we get to first interim, because we're all hoping that we will have the official apportionment from CDE. And then I just answered this question earlier today as well. We still do not have the precise rules on spending Prop 28 yet. So because this was a ballot measure that was put on the statewide ballot and not something that went through the rulemaking process in the legislature, they're still making up the rules, and we might not know those until the spring.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you know how much you have, but you just can't spend it because you don't know the rules behind it.
Yeah, and so, again, this is about this year's budget. We did some strategic things knowing what our estimate was. One was we determined to hire the elementary music teachers because we knew that would not butt up against our total amount. So we moved forward with hiring elementary music teachers. We've held off on secondary because it's more complicated there with how the additional funding could work within master scheduling, and not knowing what that final amount was. We didn't want to commit to hiring and putting more staff in a master schedule that we might not get funding for. And it had actually decreased from the initial, from way back in January, until June, those estimates were dropping because the size of Prop 98 was dropping. And so, it was sliding down, and we just wanted to be cautious before we committed to doing anything with revenue that we didn't exactly know how much we were going to have and what the rules were going to be around spending it, but we thought we were safe with elementary, and many districts have done the same thing.
And you know the full amount that you're going to be getting or a portion of?
We have an estimate
You have an
for the full amount, which
Oh, you
is,
do? Oh.
yeah, we have an estimate for the full amount, which is under $1 million, just under. And so, but the last time we got an estimate, it dropped by $50,000. So, we're being careful.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mr. Dill, I know you were talking to your colleagues throughout the state regarding attendance. Do any of your colleagues have, said, hey, we figured it out, and there's a real success story here somewhere in the state, getting pre-COVID numbers back on attendance?
I have not spoken to anyone who said they've fully recovered. The same tale that I hear is we all did better. I mean, consistently, we all did better last year than we did before, but we're not back to where we were. I have one colleague who is in a district where enrollment is growing, but their attendance is still declining. And so even though they are growing in enrollment, they have less funding this year than they had last year. And so they are in a very strange place, and we're fortunate we're not in that predicament.
Okay. Other questions? Trustee Verbeth.
What's the fiscal impact that we're looking at with the change from previous to current?
So for this current year, we are funded on a 3-year rolling average, and so our funding is set for this year. And that we knew that going into this year, how much we would receive in local control funding formula. If we were just to look at the variance between where we are now and if we were funded on our pre-COVID amount, that would be about $2.4 million, maybe $2.5 million difference. If I were to really geek out on the number and figure out that would factor in the 3-year rolling average, it would be something less than that. But if we were back to the way we were, where we were funded on current year ADA, it would be about a $2.5 million swing.
So just to follow up on Trustee Pearson, he asked, what are your colleagues saying? How are people improving? How are other districts improving their ADA?
When I speak to my colleagues, we're usually just commiserating on our money, and so and leave that up to principals and certificated staff on working on strategies to improve attendance, as they're the ones who see the kids every day, and it really has to come from the ground up and not the top down for improving attendance.
Trustee Rawlings.
Thank you. In August, we did there was a revised budget that stated that we were looking at a little over 153 million in revenue, and that our ending balance would be a little over 32 million. Now we're at 172 and 41 million. What contributes to such a significant change in proposed budget to unaudited actuals?
That would be the difference between, at the time, we did not know the actual amounts of the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant and the Arts Music Discretionary Block Grant, and so those would have been added in at first interim, I believe.
But then even at the estimated at second interim, there were still $6 to $7 million differences. How do you explain those differences?
So by second interim, we had the news that the governor was proposing to cut the Arts and Music Instructional Materials Block Grant, and so we reduced the revenue assumption for the current year at second interim. And so that would be reflective. And that gets back to my opening comments of every time we bring a budget, it's based off of the best information that we have at that time. And those assumptions get updated at every budget cycle. And so at different points of the year, we may have different information. And this year was probably more of a roller coaster than normal going from adopted budget all the way to year end. We didn't know about block grants, then we knew about them, and we put them in, and then one was proposed to be cut, so we took it out, and at the very end of the year, it got put back in, and now it's being reflected in actuals. So this is where you see that cycle in revenue. And then we also were increasing our expenditure budgets through the year as we were, suffering from, cost increases and cost pressures, particularly in services, and then also adding in salary adjustments at the end of the year. So, each one of those things was something that was learned at a different point in the year, and so at each point of the budget process, we put in the best information and best estimates we had at that time.
Trustee Rawlings.
And then, so now that we realize we have additional dollars, where does that get added into the adopted budget from this year?
Well, it's already in there because if you look at where we saw the surplus for this year, and actually, let me just go back to where we see the surplus for this year on the in the general fund. It is in the restricted side. About $10.3 million of that surplus is from the Arts, Music, and Instructional Materials Block Grant and the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant. Because we received 11.3 last year. We spent 900,000 on textbook adoption last year, as was the plan. And so the rest of that $10.3 million on the restricted side was always intended to be spent this year for to sustain the certificated staff that were in last year's budget that had been paid for by federal funds, and then to use the arts and music dollars for upcoming textbook adoptions, and also now the additional instructional support that was approved in June. So all of those dollars on the restricted side were already planned for and carried forward into this year, last year.
Trustee Rawlings. No, I have a question, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, in looking at the last 3 years, it seems like our ending balance has continued to go up and up and up. But we have, but we've predicted that it would go down, down, down because we have additional dollars that would be spent, and that's, at the end of the year. So I just want to, from what you're telling me, that you anticipate that our ending balance will go down so this time next year, we're going to see a decrease in our ending balance.
We will definitely see it in the restricted side.
Will we see, I'm talking overall, because you're saying that we're
Well,
going to
that's-
spend it on textbooks, we're going to spend it on all these other things. So we're going to see a decrease for the first time in at least the last 3 years.
I'd say that's not entirely true because we did have an unrestricted deficit this year. We had one last year.
I'm talking overall. ending
Overall,
balance.
but I look at those different funds differently. But the black bar there, $10 million of that is 2 large grants. A little over $5.5 million are already booked in salaries for this year. The remaining dollars, we need to put in the $800,000 for additional teachers that were approved after the budget was adopted, essentially, because we were instructed to put it in this year. So that's not reflected in there yet. And then to the extent that we spend any of those additional textbook tagged dollars on upcoming adoptions, that will also further deplete that black bar according to the plan. So, all in, that black bar is already intended to be, half of it is already locked up in salaries and benefits this year.
Okay, I'd kind of shift a little bit on a budget item with SPED in terms of contributions by the state and federal government. And I know you've reported in the past, there's been some increases, but transportation side of SPED in particular, I'm assuming that your colleagues are also, when you talk about this, that they're seeing the increases as well, too.
Yeah, and it's a double whammy in that it's the additional number of students who are qualifying for transportation and the increased cost for transportation. So you're getting hit on two ways. The one little bit of good news in special education transportation came in last year's Budget Act, where for the first time the state agreed to fund 60% of your prior year expenditures on transportation. So while we saw an increase, we're going to get 6 cents on the dollar in this year's budget for revenue. So there's always going to be a lag of what you spent, and then the following year you get 60% of what you spent. And so we've incorporated that into our revenue assumptions for this year, that we would be receiving that reimbursement. But still, we're on the hook for the other 40% of the growth in that cost. But at least it's not 100%, which is what it would have been 2 years ago.
And on the federal side, do we continue to see just minimal increases?
It's minimal at best on the federal side. The state has done a good job at increasing the dollars per student that are allocated towards SELPAs. However, statewide, there's declining enrollment, and so you will see actually fewer dollars flowing to SELPAs, even though they're, on one side, they're giving more dollars per student, on the other side, there's fewer students. So.
Is there fewer SPED students? I thought we were increasing, no, we're
So
increasing.
special education funding is actually based on total average daily attendance, not the number of students who receive special education services.
And then I had a question on what percentage of that $1 million increase was trash?
It was much
You lumped
lower.
Utilities and trash.
Yeah, it was much lower. It was I think less than $200,000, so less than 20%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any, Trustee Rawlings?
Can you tell me what the value is of looking at estimated actuals to unaudited actuals over looking at proposed budget, first interim, second interim, and then unaudited actuals as far as really a scope of how
Yeah.
we're doing in our projections?
Yeah. I'll say it's in the last 3 years, it's less valuable to do that because we have seen so many changes within the years. And there were years when we went in with a budget assumption and we were looking good all throughout the year. And then at the very end of the year, they gave us more federal money and we had to count it towards that year even though we couldn't even spend it. And so that threw that year off. And so in this year, where we were at the beginning of the year versus all of those revenue fluctuations I just mentioned, not due to anything that we've done, but because of the state's action, this is why I say, hey, each one of those snapshots in time is the best snapshot that we have. If we ever get back to boring in terms of our budgeting, when I think of the way things were back in 2016 and 17, when things were a little more stable and predictable, I'd say that would be more valuable to say where did we start the year and where did we end the year, and maybe look in the middle and see were there any other peaks and valleys. But right now, when I think back to the 2019 or the 2019 to 20 school year to now, there's just been so many different changes that we've had to deal with both on revenue and expenditures that it's not as valuable as, hey, by the time we got to the end of the year, here's where we landed.
How is providing the estimated actuals to the unaudited actuals, how is that more valuable than what you've described?
Because the estimated actuals, we've already made it through most of the school year, and so we've already accounted for all of the major changes that have happened through the year, and we're zeroing in on what we believe the ending balance will be for the following year, and it's accounting for all of those strange changes. Normally, it's, as I said, it's kind of a boring operation, and it shouldn't be that different from, say, your second interim. But in the last 3 years, we've seen big changes between February and June.
No, I'm done. Okay. Any other questions, trustees? Go ahead.
And then on slide 12, you talked about the energy costs and that sort of thing. And I know you and I have discussed some proposed decisions at the CPUC. Are you monitoring those and ensuring that we are making sure our voices are heard, that we're protecting our solar investment with it when it comes to our rates?
Yeah, and I did receive the information you've sent. I'm still trying to determine whether that actual proposal affects us, because it doesn't appear to me that it does, even though they use the word schools. We don't have multiple meters at our schools, and that's that one particular proposal. But we do get updates from the San Diego coalition that we have, that I think all but 4 school districts belong to. So we do have attorneys that are following the SDG&E rate cases and report back to the business group periodically on anything that we need to advocate for. And those rate cases come up every 3 years.
And you're monitoring those and making sure that if we need to make sure our voices are being heard, that is heard in order to try to stop detrimental actions being taken by the CPUC, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on. May I have a motion to approve the 2022-23 unaudited actuals financial report, Proposition 30 Education Protection Account, expenditure report, and adopt resolution number 10-2324, which sets forth the 2022, 23, and 23-24 GAN limit appropriations.
So move.
Second, Rawlings.
Trustee Burbeff made the motion. Trustee Rawlings seconded. Discussion. Trustee Rawlings.
Yes, I would like to make a request. In years past, and actually in the last 2 second interims, we have received the actual information where we have what the proposed or the projected expenditures, revenues, beginning balance, ending balance, from start to finish, where we have the second interim, we have the adopted budget, first interim, second interim, estimated actuals, and then unaudited actuals. And my concern is that, as we go through the year, budgets are a reflection in time, but we're making decisions in the middle of the year. And that I would find it valuable to receive that information at unaudited actuals time. So I'm asking to see if my trustees would agree that when we get, on a yearly basis, when we get this presentation, that is also presented. That we get to see what was proposed, the first interim, second interim, and what the outcome was in the unaudited actuals. And we used to receive that in the years past. So that's my request, that next year's unaudited actuals will have that information.
Okay, so let me understand. Well, first of all, as far as, I'm going to ask a question of Mr. Dill. How much staff time would that take?
But that's easy to do, and the only difference is I might have to add more context in these days, but in the past, we did have a chart that did do that. I know exactly what you're pointing to, and it would be an easy thing to include.
And I want to understand, Trustee Rawlings, the intent of having that information. I'm not sure I'm clear.
I mean, when we're making financial decisions for multi-years, and when we're only seeing small snapshots, it's hard for us to say, yes, we want to have intervention teachers on a regular basis, or we want to have art teachers on on an ongoing basis. When we are seeing well, gosh, our revenues look down right now at second interim. But when we really look at it over time, and we look at what the outcomes are, we have the ability to make those decisions without fear of going bankrupt, if we can see that information on a regular basis from the unaudited actuals.
So why is that any different? I'm using your example. Why is that any different than when Mr. Dill and his team reports out to us what the trend lines are?
Because we're not seeing what was proposed. We're only seeing what the end period is. If you look at that graph, it's all actuals, actuals, actuals. It doesn't say this is what was proposed, this is what happened at first interim, this is what happened at second. We got this big chunk of money in second interim, and that's why we're looking at the unaudited actuals of rolling over $5 million into our ending balance.
If that'll help, I'm confident. I understand what, because it's so wacky in the state in terms of how money flows
Right.
between the state and school districts.
But I'm just saying that the board should see that, right, the board should see the big picture and the fluctuations, is what I'm saying.
I'll support-
And the public,
I'll
and the
support
public.
it if it's
Okay,
going to help.
yeah, sure.
But I believe Mr. Dill does a really good job of letting us know what, for me, I'm just speaking for myself,
Mm-hmm.
I understand enough from you, Mr. Dill, where we're going to be fiscally and what we can afford if we're doing a budgeting process and we want to add X. And I ask questions, can we afford this, Mr. Dill? Can we afford it in the out years and everything? You'll give me a straight answer, yes, no, because, da-da-da. But if this is going to help, I absolutely will support it.
Thank you.
Okay. So how many fingers for that?
Or thumbs, not fingers.
Thumbs.
Yeah, I'd much rather have a thumb than a finger, trust
Yeah,
me.
that was a trick question. How many thumbs for that? Okay, thank you. 4. Okay, anything else in discussion? Okay, we have a motion. Everybody understand the motion, first of all? Okay. And we've had discussion. Ms. Garcia, please call for a vote.
Student Board Representative Hirsch,
Yes.
Trustee Ward,
Yes.
Trustee Verbeff,
Yes.
Trustee Rawlings.
Yes.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. We now move on to item 7.3, Measure HH Bond Program Monthly Update. Trustees, this is an information discussion item. I will now hand over back to Mr. Dill.
Thank you again. This is discussion and no presentation, so I'll just give you some updates as we go through. And we have our monthly reports added to the agenda. What I will start with is Valley Middle School, because I've got good news, and that is that we did receive DSA approval for the interior renovations, and so that crew is going to keep on working. That's not what the report says that was attached to the agenda. We are going to edit that before we give that over to Principal Flowers to send out to her community. So just a little bit of an update. Work continues with those classrooms to be completed by the end of this calendar year. We're still working on the grading and stormwater permits for the interior quad to get from the city of Carlsbad. Right now, that quad is torn up because we had to do a number of utility replacements and improvements, so it looks bad. But we can't do the rest of the work there until we have our stormwater and grading permits. So we did what we could. On Aviar Oaks, the buildings 500 and 600 are complete. That was a true summer sprint, and teachers and kids are back in those classrooms. For Building 300, which will be the arts and the music and STEAM building, the interior demolition and the roof demolition has occurred on that, but we are waiting for the DSA approval on that, which we hope to get by the end of this month. And then once that happens, the contractor is still on site. They're going to push forward with doing the 300s renovation as soon as that happens. Also, we should get approval on Building 800 as well. When that happens, we will demolish that building. Once we, I think, move some additional teachers around into the 300s, we'll demolish 800, but we'll do that when school's not in session. So it'll be a fall break, a winter break, a spring break. We'll get that work done and then proceed. And we're still working on the overall site plan for grading and stormwater with the city on Aviar Oaks Elementary. Calavera Hills Elementary, the STEAM classroom is being fabricated. It will be ready for delivery later this month. The one hang-up on that is waiting on the County Department of Health for approval to reroute reclaimed water lines in the area where the foundation will be laid. So the city is good with it. It's now in the hands of the County Department of Health since we are moving one of those pipes. It's Ms. Kimbrell is checking in with them regularly. They know it's an urgent thing for us. It's a workload issue for them to get to it. But we're having good conversations with that, and so they don't have any objections. They just need to get to it. So we're pushing as hard as we can. On Buena Vista, We are waiting for both DSA and city approval on that project. Once we get the city approval, actually both of those, we're hoping by the end of this calendar year, we'll turn around and start mobilizing the Buena Vista project, which would start with the work on the upper pad there where we're going to put the new classroom buildings. We can fence all of that up and start the demolition, grading, and construction work with the eye, if we can get this started at the beginning of the calendar year to be done by the fall for next school year. So we're pushing and we're hoping that we can get that project going very early spring, winter. The last project that I'll talk about is a brand new one as of Sunday morning, and that's Pacific Rim Elementary School. We had a water pipe burst in the wall separating a classroom and a restroom, and it flooded the entire building. So 5 classrooms and the restroom there. So we actually will be starting demolition. We've moved the classrooms out. We got them all out on Sunday night, and some work continued on Monday morning. All of the classrooms are in different spaces on campus, so everyone is accommodated. Now that everything is out, we're going to start the demolition of damaged building materials tomorrow. We've already submitted our property insurance claim, but as we were strategizing on the reconstruction of that, knowing that Pacific Rim Elementary modernization is part of the next phase, the thought was, well, let's not make teachers move more than once, and if we're going to do construction inside the classroom, let's do it to the modernized standard for the upcoming modernization. So we've already met with the architect and the construction manager on site yesterday, in order to start a discrete, separate project that will be along the same standards that we've seen for modernization of our other elementary schools. And so we can rebuild that just once, and teachers can move in and they can be the first recipients of a modernized classroom at Pacific Rim. The other phases will come in behind that. And if there is any good news in that, is that insurance proceeds will be partially funding the reconstruction. So we will get reimbursement for the value of what was damaged, not necessarily the value of the new and shiny things that we would be putting in or things that weren't damaged that we're going to upgrade and modernize, but we'll get some partial renovation, and so that will save Measure HH some funds on Pacific Rim. So that's and we're already working as fast as we can on that one.
And thank you, Mr. Dill, and thank the team for everybody, the response to what happened on a weekend. They always happen on weekends. But thank you for that.
It's actually better that it happens on a weekend and not when kids are in classrooms.
This is a time for public comment. Have any blue cards been received?
We do not have any blue cards.
Okay. Staff, do you have anything to add? Okay, trustees, do you have any questions?
I had one question. With the water damage, were there teacher supplies that were damaged in their things?
Not as bad as, say, like a fire sprinkler, if that had gone off in a classroom. It was where the water intruded was pretty much limited to a resource classroom, so that teacher probably likely has, because it was right above one of her cabinets. But the other classrooms, the water rose and it didn't get all the way up into where they might have had things stored. There might be some other things that were on the walls that, because of the humidity and moisture, are damaged, like posters and things. So we've actually already had communication with the school on that, yes, we will be replacing materials.
Okay.
We're going to strategize tomorrow afternoon on what's the best way to go about replacing things that might have been damaged in terms of instructional materials. And that would be fully reimbursed by insurance on that.
Trustees, any other questions? Trustee Verbeth.
And as far as storage, like, are the teachers receiving enough space for their storage to accommodate wherever they've been moved to? I'm sure they've not been able to take everything with them. Where's everything else going? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll have a look at it tomorrow afternoon. We've said it's okay to get additional storage container on site if there's some places that we need to temporarily store the things that might have been in their storage cabinets, if they don't have room in their new spaces to do that. But, you know, whether, we'll help them out whatever we need. We've already said whatever it takes to make that a fully functioning learning space with everything that the teachers needs, from technology to, we already had the desks and chairs and whiteboards. We actually relocated the whiteboards overnight from the old classrooms into the new spaces where they didn't have them. So we're doing everything we can. These are interior pods of multi-classroom buildings, so they can function as a classroom. They're designed to be classrooms or collaboration spaces. So, you know, we just had to quickly convert the, we had 3 that were not being used as classroom spaces. They've been converted to classroom spaces.
Any other questions? Okay, trustees, is there any discussion? Trustee Rawlings?
I just want to say thank you for working so quickly and for incorporating this into the bond work. And Trustee Pearson, I just wanted to hear your thoughts, because you won't be here for the facilities workshop, that how would you feel about, or it sounds like you are in support of maybe moving up some work at Pac Rim in order to kind of take advantage of construction being on the campus. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, because I'm assuming that would be part of our discussion and at the end of the month.
First of all, is that appropriate for me to answer that question, not being in the facilities workshop? It's okay, just want to make sure of the process. My opinion is, you know, I'd like to hear from Mr. Dill. It sounds like we're moving up, and it's going to save some HH funds, if I heard that correctly. If that's it, then I'm supportive of that. Yes. Okay, to answer your question. Okay, do that. Any other discussion? Okay. Do you want to, board, do you want to take a 7.5-minute break? It ends up being 10 minutes, okay. Is that okay to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back?
Sam, I think you need to hand it to Ann. I think. Oh, he's got it. Good job, Rob.
No, it's 8 minutes now.
Okay, we're back. Thank you. We now move on to item 7.4, Community Facilities District Number 5, proposed annexation number 8, adoption of resolutions approving a school facilities mitigation and annexation agreement, intention to annex territory and levy special taxes, and recording a boundary map of the proposed annexation territory. Trustees, this is a discussion action item. I will hand over back to Mr. Dill.
Thank you. Now I get to educate you all on annexation into community facilities districts. This is actually a choice that a developer makes upfront when they are building a new development of whether to pay developer fees upfront or to pass those on to the future owners over 30 years by annexing into one of our community facilities districts, CFDs. Our legal counsel works with the developer in creating all the exhibits. The developer pays for all of our costs to annex them into that CFD, and that starts the three-step process. So on the next 2 meetings, you will also see this item return, and we'll be asking you to take different actions related to this annexation. So tonight is step 1. Just as mentioned by President Pearson, we're asking that you approve the mitigation agreement, that you adopt the resolution of intention to annex the property into the CFD and to levy the special taxes, and to adopt the resolution approving the boundary map. And I'll be back next month and the month after with 2 more steps of the process, and I'm happy to inform you or answer questions along the way about this process.
Thank you, Mr. Dill. This is time for public comment. Have any blue cards been received?
We do not have any blue cards.
Okay. Staff, do you have anything to add? Trustees, do you have any questions? Okay. May I have a motion to approve resolution number 05-2324, Exhibit A, resolution number 06-2324, Exhibit B, and resolution 07-2324, Exhibit C.
So moved.
Second, Rawlings.
Trustee Rawlings, second. Trustee Verba made the motion. Discussion. Ms. Garcia, please take a vote.
Student Board Representative Hirsch,
Yes.
Trustee Ward,
Yes.
Trustee Verbeff,
Yes.
Trustee Rawlings,
Yes.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, thank you. We now move on to item 7.5, public hearing and approval, resolution number 08-2324, sufficiency of textbooks and instructional materials for 2023-2024. Trustees, this is a discussion action item and includes a public hearing. I will hand it over to Dr. Nye.
Thank you, President Pearson. Trustees, Dr. Churchill. Staff has confirmed that students in the district have sufficient textbooks and instructional materials aligned to state-adopted curriculum frameworks as provided in Exhibit A. This time, I'll turn it back to President Pearson.
Okay, this is time designated for public hearing on this item. Have any blue cards been received?
We do not have any blue cards.
Staff, do you have anything to add? No. Okay. Trustees, do you have any questions? We have a motion to adopt Board Resolution Number 08-2324, declaring that each student has been provided sufficient textbooks and instructional materials aligned with content standards and curriculum frameworks, Exhibit B.
Motion.
Second, Rawlings.
Trustee Ward made the motion. Trustee Rawlings seconded. Discussion. Ms. Garcia, please call for a vote.
Student Board Representative Hirsch,
Yes.
Trustee Ward,
Yes.
Trustee Verbeff,
Yes.
Trustee Rawlings.
Yes.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. We now move on to item 7.6, approval, resolution number 11-2324, teachers teaching outside credential authorization per EC 44253.10, EC 44263. Trustees, this is a discussion action item. I'll hand over to Ms. Megan Arias.
Thank you. It is respectfully recommended that the Board of Trustees adopt the resolution for teachers teaching outside their credential as authorized by Ed Code. There are currently 16 teachers who hold a credential but do not have the required credential to teach one class outside of their credential area, but they have been determined to have special expertise, training, and knowledge of the subject area to teach it based on either college coursework they have taken, specialized training, or staff development they have completed. Thank you.
This is time for public comment. Have any blue cards been received?
We do not have any blue cards.
Staff, do you have anything to add? Trustees, do you have any questions? May I have a motion to adopt resolution number 11-2324, teachers teaching outside credential authorization per EC 44253.10, EC 44263.
Motion.
Second, Rawlings.
Trustee Ward made the motion. Trustee Rawlings seconded the motions. Discussion. No discussion. Ms. Garcia, please call for a vote.
Student Board Representative Hirsch,
Yes.
Trustee Ward,
Yes.
Trustee Verbeff,
Yes.
Trustee Rawlings,
Yes.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. We now move on to item 7.7, approval of resolution number 09-2324, Week of the School Administrator. Trustees, this is a discussion action item. I will hand over to Ms. Megan Arias.
It is respectfully recommended that the Board of Trustees adopt the Week of the School Administrator resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. This is time for public comment. Have any blue cards been received?
We do not have any blue cards.
Staff, do you have anything to add? Okay, trustees, do you have any questions? May I have a motion to adopt resolution number 09-2324 designating October 8th through the 14th, 2023 as Week of the School Administrator?
Motion.
Trustee
Second.
Ward made the motion. Trustee Verbeff seconded. Discussion. Okay. Ms. Garcia, please call for a vote.
Student Board Representative Hirsch,
Yes.
Trustee Ward,
Yes.
Trustee Verbeff,
Yes.
Trustee Rawlings,
Yes.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, so we traditionally, it's been the practice of this board to read the resolution following approval. So, let's see, what order?
You start with a whereas and go to medium and then go.
Okay. Does everybody understand that? Okay. Resolution number 09-2324, resolution proclaiming October 8th through October 14th, 2023, Week of the School Administrator. On a motion of Member Ward, seconded by Member Verbeff, Trustee Verbeff, the following resolution is adopted.
Whereas approximately 15,000 certificated and classified school administrators work in California's public schools, and
Whereas nearly 60% of these administrators are principals and vice principals providing direct support for the educational programs at school sites, and
Whereas research has determined that one of the main attributes of effective schools is the competent leadership of principals, and
Whereas other certificated and classified administrators provide leadership and support for the educational program by developing and implementing the curriculum, selecting textbooks and instructional materials, recruiting, training, and evaluating classified and certificated staff, managing the budget and monitoring cost controls, implementing school board policies and complying with federal, state, and local regulations and laws, planning and maintaining school facilities, and providing transportation, nutrition, and social service programs to pupils and their families, and
Whereas research shows that efficient district-level administration improves teacher effectiveness, and
Whereas research shows that public school administration in California has become increasingly efficient and effective, with fewer administrators managing more schools with more pupils than in the past, and
Whereas a school's administrative team includes confidential employees who perform and assist in the performance of many critical functions, and
Whereas school administrators and confidential employees ensure that effective and innovative classroom instruction is promoted in every area of California, and
now therefore be it resolved that the week of October 8th through October 14th, 2023 be proclaimed the week of the school administrator, in honor of the many outstanding contributions and services provided by the administrative teams in California's public school districts, and
be it further resolved that the administrators of California's public schools be commended for their support of and contributions to quality education in the state.
great. And I'd like to add, Trustee Ward, you're also a administrator too in your school district, so we want to honor that as well too.
thank you.
Let's do
Thank
that.
you.
Okay. Thank you. Now we move on to no, we don't. Now we move on to item 7.8, revision of board policy, second reading. Trustees, this is a discussion action item. I will hand over to Dr. Churchill.
Thank you. This board policy was reviewed at the August 16th meeting. There was an addition made per the recommendation of Trustee Rawlings. We've updated the policy and provided it here to you for a second reading.
This is time for public comment. Have any blue cards been received?
We do not have any blue cards.
Dr. Churchill, do you have anything to add? Trustees, do you have any questions? Okay, may I have a motion to approve Board Policy 6163.4 as the second reading?
so moved, Rawlings.
Trustee Raw-
Second.
Trustee Rawlings made the motion. Trustee Ward seconded the motion. Discussion. Ms. Garcia, please call for a vote.
Student Board Representative Hirsch,
yes.
Trustee Ward,
Yes.
Trustee Verbeff,
Yes.
Trustee Rawlings,
Yes.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. We now move on to item 7.9, revision of board policies, first reading. Trustees, this is a discussion action item. I'll hand over to Dr. Churchill.
Thank you. 7 of our existing policies have been revised to reflect changes in language recommended by the California School Boards Association. Those changes are generally recommended by CSBA after being vetted by their legal counsel. It's our practice to, the extent possible, to reflect the language of CSBA. So that is what you see before you. We did ask trustees Williamson and Rawlings to take a look at those in advance, as is also our practice. They weighed in on a few minor changes just to remain consistent with our practices here in Carlsbad, and we're bringing them to you as a first reading.
This is time for public comment. Have any blue cards been received?
We do not have any blue cards.
Dr. Churchill, anything to add? Trustees, do you have any questions? Trustee Rawlings, and then Trustee Verbeff.
Yes. I think there was some confusion on if we were going to bring certain ones forward and if changes were going to be made or not. So I am going to ask questions of staff on those. And I was having a conversation. I wasn't just lollygagging. I was having a conversation with staff in the hallway to try to figure this one out. So, but I have not been able to figure it out. So My question is either to Director Arias or anyone else who can answer this on the school policies, on the school day, 6112. I had asked the question in the last paragraph, and I'm going to say the third sentence down, where it says, then the total number of school days for which the school is in session, the board shall consult in a good faith effort to reach agreement. And I had asked if this was a mandatory subject of bargaining or not. And I was told yes, but then the term consult remained in the verbiage. Because I had suggested that we change it, and I thought it had been changed to the board shall ensure negotiations in good faith shall occur to reach agreement. Now, if I'm wrong, I mean, I don't know for sure, but again, I thought it had been, and I had asked for it to be changed, and then it wasn't. So that's my first question.
Yeah, staff can certainly research that and get a final clarifying answer as to whether or not it is required or not that the school day be negotiated or not. So let us look at that. I think that we read that as in a good faith effort agreements is kind of that give and take of back and forth with labor at that point in time.
But as you know, with like curriculum, for instance, that it's required that you consult, but not necessarily negotiate, to where other areas are required to negotiate. So I was confused when you had the term consult and then in good faith. I had not seen that, and it just hadn't been clarified before it came up in the meeting. So, so would it be appropriate then to ask, or to, when a motion's made, to not include that one?
So if you are not waiving the second reading, if this is a first reading and then this is going to come back for a second reading, you could include this as one of the ones that you're moving forward to a second reading. We could provide the answer and make any updates prior to that meeting and posting it. And or you could, at the second reading, ask that it come back for a third reading. Or, as you just suggested, just don't approve, make a motion this evening to not include this one as a first reading. You've got lots of options.
Okay, and then to do that, if I did the first option, would then there need to be 3 trustees to agree to that, to ask staff to research it and bring it back, or how would that work?
No, we understand the question, and that was a little bit of our miscommunication on the front end of not answering the question that you had originally asked. So
Okay.
we would have asked it if we had, we would have answered it anyway, so.
Perfect, thank you. And then my second one is for Dr. Nye on policy 6146.11. We had not had an opportunity to finish our conversation on that one. And we were, I think, at least 2 of us were under the impression that it was going to be pulled from this agenda, and I did not see it. Or I would have asked for it to be pulled off of this piece. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I can't recall whether or not, I do recall that in conversations, we did talk about delaying bringing this forward, but I can't recall where we landed on that ultimately. Alternative credits towards graduation, 6146.11.
Yeah, I'll own that mistake. We did have the discussion of having some additional discussion. So again, with this one, I would recommend either just making a motion and not including this one to approve as a first reading to give us a little bit more time, or if you move it forward as a first reading, knowing that you could pull it as a second as well. Whatever you prefer.
Thank you.
Trustee Verbeff.
I'd like to ask some questions about 6164.2. So, Dr. Churchill mentioned that it's been vetted by CSBA. I wanted to ask, it says we will provide MTSS in accordance with the law. Is it a law, or what law requires us to provide MTSS? I didn't know if that needed to be in there, or can we delete it?
Yeah, I believe there's ed code around, and other board policy that requires us to offer tiered intervention strategies for all students. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. Director Ogzit might be able to, she's better with board policies than me, but I know that we are required to offer that by law.
Would you like to come to the mic, just so everyone can hear? Thank you.
Yeah, so in this one, in this policy, it was updated based on new legislation that passed about what the role of the counselor would be. So in this sentence, it's referencing wanting to make sure that the responsibilities of the counselors are in accordance with the law and that they serve under the MTSS process.
Trustee Burbaff? Okay. Okay.
Anybody else have any questions?
I'm not hearing any other questions. Did you need?
Well, I guess I'm just asking, are counselors qualified to provide all of these additional services? I've talked to a couple counselors and they're quite busy, so I didn't know. We have contracts with third-party professionals who do provide some of these services, so I'm just wondering, can they handle this load and are they qualified?
The counselors are qualified. That's part of like their training. And so I think the law just clarified like what their responsibilities should be.
Okay, Trustee Burbaff? Okay. So, instead of me just reading off this.
Can I make a motion?
Trustee Rawlings?
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to adopt Exhibit A, B, C, I'm sorry, I apologize, I'm backing up. Exhibit B, Exhibit D, Exhibit F, Exhibit J, and Exhibit L, and Exhibit N for first reading and to waive the second reading.
Okay, so I have these by number. You gave me by letter.
They're on the agenda by letter.
Okay. So, does everybody understand the motion?
She's asking to waive the second reading. Is that correct?
That's correct on the ones that I identified?
We need a second on the
I'm
motion
sorry.
before we can discuss.
You know what?
Second.
Can I correct my motion?
Do you want to withdraw your motion and start
Yes,
over?
withdraw my motion and start
Okay,
over.
why don't you withdraw your motion? And then start
Thank you.
over.
I'm withdrawing my motion.
Yeah.
I'd like to make another motion. I apologize. I'd like to move that we adopt and waive the second reading on Exhibit B, Exhibit D, Exhibit J, Exhibit L, and Exhibit N.
We're waiving it?
We're waiving the second reading on just the ones I said.
Oh, okay.
If I get a second.
Second.
Okay. First of all, I want to make sure that was, everybody understands the motion. Dr. Churchill, you're good, okay. And did I hear a second from Trustee Ward? Okay. Trustee Burbaff, you understand the motion, okay. Okay. Discussion. Trustee Rawlings.
And I just wanted to say, I did mess up, but this motion would remove the one that we had talked about that could be further discussed, and then I'll be coming back with another motion that we would not waive the second reading on one of the board policies that has already been discussed. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, but all the other ones, and just so everyone knows that these did go through the committee, the ad hoc committee, so we had the discussion. The only two that there was some confusion on was the two that I mentioned. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that in the discussion.
Thank you, Trustee Rawlings, for the clarification. Any other discussion? Okay. Ms. Garcia, please call for a vote.
Student Board Representative Hirsch,
Yes.
Trustee Ward,
Yes.
Trustee Verbath,
No.
Trustee Rawlings,
Yes.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes.
Motion passes 3-1.
Okay. Thank you. We now move on to Part A. On which item are you making a motion, Trustee Rawlings?
I'd like to move that we adopt Exhibit F for a first reading. And I'm looking for a second.
Second.
Okay. So Trustee Rawlings made motion to accept Exhibit F, first reading, and waive a second? No, not waive a second. And Trustee Ward seconded the motion. Is everyone clear? Okay. Discussion.
Just to clarify, staff understands that they're going to investigate the term consult versus negotiate in the last paragraph, and then bring it back on the second reading with clarification. That was what we had talked about in the questioning component. So that's why I didn't waive the second reading.
Okay. Okay. Other discussion? All right. Ms. Garcia, please call for a vote.
Student Board Representative Hirsch,
Yes.
Trustee Ward,
Yes.
Trustee Verbath,
Yes.
Trustee Rawlings.
Yes.
Trustee Pearson.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay. Let's try this again. Okay, thank you. Now we move on to Part 8, Communications. Item 8.1, Public Comment on Non-Agenda Items. This is time that members of the public have the opportunity to address the board on any non-agendized item that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. How many blue cards have been received for non-agenda items?
We have a total of 3 blue cards.
3, okay. In order to allow speakers to present their comments, ensure we are able to properly attend to the business of the board, per Board Bylaw 9323, public comments will be limited to 20 minutes. This means each speaker will have 3 minutes. When I call your name, please come to the podium, state your name, and indicate whether or not you live within the boundaries of the school district. The first speaker is Mr. Scott Davison.
I just want to start off and say that I appreciate the board permanently moving non-agenda public comment to the end of the meetings, especially without notice. It is consistent with the board's overall attitude of always limiting the amount of time and number of speakers to discourage public comments. It is consistent with the comments of our individual board members that don't want to hear from the public, like Trustee Rawlings' comment at the June meeting that she wasn't interested in hearing from the public. And it is entirely consistent with the superintendent's attitude towards the public after he ignored 55 pages of feedback on the DEI plan and publicly condemned a member of his staff for sharing his religious beliefs at his own church. If you watch the news, you'll note that school boards who want to include parents are moving in the opposite direction, often having meetings lasting hours and letting everybody speak their piece. But I understand that's not you. Did you see the survey that came out last week about who supports free speech? It is generally favored by most groups that are oppressed the most. In this case, it was broken down by religion. Guess who was at the top? Christians. But to be fair, almost all religious groups responded similarly. The only groups which were significantly lower were atheists. So yes, Christians already know Superintendent Churchill is opposed to their freedom of speech and freedom of religion, But now it's clear that the entire board isn't really interested in free speech either. So why do I appreciate that the board moved public comments to the end? It's not just for the selfish reason that it will guarantee me 3 full minutes to speak since no one else will stick around till the end. It's because I appreciate people really telling us who they are and not pretending to be somebody that they're not. Your secret decision to move comments to the end tells us exactly who you are and what you believe in. As we all know, very few parents and students have time to show up to these meetings to listen or to speak since they're busy working, studying, making dinner, and attending countless extracurricular activities. So thank you for showing us who you are and who you want to hear from.
Okay, our next speaker is Shauna Hurst.
Good evening, Shauna Hurst, and I live in the district, and I also am the Carlsbad Unified Council of PTA Presidents. But this is my personal opinion that these chairs back in the district office are torture devices. And if you see me not be able to sit, it's because I'm like truly in back pain. So I don't really have back pain. It is literally just these chairs. Anyways, I just want to do a quick report on PTA activities because it is the beginning of the year. All the PTA units are back in full force. It's exciting this year because we have PTAs at all 13 of our schools. PAC-REM's PTO converted to a PTA over the summer, and those parents really worked hard to do that. So appreciate all the hard work that they put in. At PAC-REM, they already have almost 100% of the teachers have joined the PTA, and they have over 120 members, and already have funding to fund 4 credentialed assistants in PE, art, and STEM from September to May. So they've been very, very busy. CHE, we had, well, I'm not there anymore, but I feel like I'm always going to be at CHE. They had their annual Pack Cake Breakfast with over 200 attendees. And the exciting thing is I did see a photo from that event, and I didn't recognize anyone. So it just means like the new crew is in, and it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like you just see a new group of people step up and make things happen. It's fantastic. At AOE, they already have secured $20,000 in corporate sponsors, 250 PTA members, and over $24,000 in donations. And they are gearing up for their Boots and Bling, which I think is a very clever name, for their daddy-daughter dance on September 30th. Carlsbad High School PTSA held a phenomenal kind of slew of events during registration. It was called their Parent Insight Nights, and they corresponded with registration. So on senior registration, it was for senior parents, and it was past senior parents coming in and doing Q&A and information on what, like if for a senior parent, what you should know for the upcoming year. And Monacy Watts and Marla Evans really led that charge. I just went to check it out for the freshmen, and it was fantastic, standing room only in the room. Love to duplicate it in Sage next year. And over the summer, Marla Evans rebuilt that CHS PTSA website and looks fantastic. And I just want to do a little shout out, even though she had to leave, is Stephanie Wells is the Valley Middle School PTSA, and she spent the whole summer, I swear, finding login and passwords for all the things. So just doing the little things takes a lot of time. So anyways, thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Mr. Sam Ward.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sam Ward, and I do live within the district. I share the concerns about the previous speaker made about moving public comment to the end. I'm assuming that since there was no board vote on this, this was a decision by the board president. I would encourage the entire board to consider this issue and take steps to make public comment and public engagement with the school board easier, not harder. This is harder, not easier. It's a poor choice. I came here today to discuss a recent incident in which a close friend and associate of Trustee Verbeth repeatedly and by name publicly attacked a recently graduated former student, CUSD student, by name on social media, referring to her as a liar and seeking a meeting with her to, quote, set the record straight, unquote, regarding her interactions with Trustee Verbeth. The sole bases, Trustee Verbeth, for your friend's attacks on this student were a discussion between you and that person, and you and that student. This incident raises a number of questions about board conduct, and I had hoped that the board would take this incident seriously and have a discussion about the board's role in discussing matters with the public and with students. Unfortunately, Trustee Pearson made clear in his reply to me that anything that does not rise to a level of a criminal violation is not a subject he's going to address. I think that's a profoundly low bar and sets a terribly low standard. Our community deserves better. Trustee Verbeff, since Trustee Pearson does not want to address these questions, I'm going to ask them of you. Are you demeaning or maligning CUSD students in conversations with third parties? Are you telling unrelated members of the public that CUSD students are liars? Are you encouraging your surrogates to attack people who disagree with you, kids who disagree with you? Are you comfortable with adult friends of yours attacking kids on social media? Are you comfortable with adult friends of yours trying to set up meetings to, quote, set the record straight with teenage girls on your behalf? Do you think these kinds of attacks are consistent with the integrity of this board? These should be easy questions for you to answer. And I doubt that, well, I have one more question. This one might be a little more challenging. If you can't answer no to each of and every one of the questions I just asked you, do you believe you're fit to sit on this board? Thank you.
Now move on to 8.2, governance team reports and request. Are there any governance team reports?
I have a request.
Let me see if there's any governance team reports. I don't think there are. Yes, Trustee Ward.
I want to request that we move public comments to the beginning of the board meeting instead of having it at the end.
Okay. Do I have thumbs for that request? I'm fine with that. It's fine. Okay. It's done.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other requests? No, seeing no, there aren't any other requests. Let's see. No. Adjournment and next meeting, and it's time, it is, let me see. What is it? 9:09. Okay, and the regular meeting is now adjourned. Our next regular meeting will take place on October 18th, 2023 at 6 p.m. at the Carlsbad Unified School District office.